No, you didn't with the frazzle dazzle.
I did. I included it several more times in this outline.
So we're coming out of this episode with plot bombed and frazzle dazzled.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Booked on Fantasy podcast.
I'm Madison.
I'm Lorraine, and we are two best friends who explore the world of fantasy through book shows and movies, but with a heavy emphasis on books. We are very excited to bring you a bonus episode today. We're diving into the wildly popular and slightly controversial Silver Elite by Dani Francis. Surprise, surprise, we have a lot of thoughts, so we're just gonna jump right in today. To give a quick spoiler rating, today's episode will be structured completely different from our normal deep dives. We will be discussing the book Silver Elite in its entirety, but to make this episode accessible to everyone, we've divided up the episode into two sections. We'll start with a spoiler-free discussion where we give a quick summary, a cover analysis, and a spoiler-free book rating. After that, we'll pause and give a huge spoiler warning before going into all the spoilers discussion that will include events from all over the book. So if you're interested in Silver Elite, but you're curious or unsure whether to read it, the first of the episode is perfect for you. And then once you devour it like we did, you can come back and listen to the rest of the episode. Furthermore, we would like to remind everyone that this is an adult podcast where we will have adult conversations. Explicit language or potentially triggering topics may be discussed, so please be mindful of that and adjust accordingly. Housekeeping. This is just one bonus episode covering the entirety of Silver Elite, but if you enjoyed this episode, then we have plenty of content to keep you busy. We are currently deep diving the Throne of Glass series, and we are very deep into our Empire of Storms coverage. In fact, we're approaching the end on that. We have also completed our deep dive of Onyx Storm. Obviously, we highly recommend both of these series. All of our episodes are spoiler-free, so they are perfect for first-time readers or veterans of the series who want to relive the magic and laugh at how adorably naive we are. If you are interested in some of our other book reviews, we have been covering the Hunger Games series via our Paging the Past episodes. And our Paging the Past episodes are geared toward revisiting some of our favorite series from the past, including Harry Potter, Twilight, and more. All right, so that is all for housekeeping, and let's get into the episode, starting with our spoiler-free section. And Addison, will you please give us the book report?
And before we get into the book report, we do want to clarify that this is copy and pasted directly from the Amazon description of the book. It is the plot synopsis that is publicly available and provided for anyone who were to go investigate the book. So we just want to make sure you know that it's not going to include any spoilers. Ren Darlington has spent her whole life in hiding, honing her psychic abilities and aiding the rebel uprising in small ways. On the continent, being modified means certain death, and Ren is one of the most powerful mods in existence. When one careless mistake places her in the hands of the enemy and she's forced to join their most elite training program, she's finally handed the perfect opportunity to strike a devastating blow from inside their ranks. But training for Silverblock can be deadly, especially when you're harboring dangerous secrets and living in close quarters with everyone who wants you dead. As the stakes grow even higher, Ren must prove herself to Silverblock, but that's easier said than done when your commanding officer is the ruthless and infuriatingly irresistible Cross Redden, who doesn't miss anything when it comes to her. As war rages between mods like her and those who aim to destroy them, Ren must decide just how far she's willing to go to protect herself and how much of the continent is worth saving.
Dun, dun, dun!
Oh, so dramatic.
I know. All right. Well, thank you for the book report. Before we get into some of the discussion, we do want to mention that there are some trigger warnings for this book. So if you have sensitivities to certain topics, here are some things that you can expect to see in Silver Elite. There is sexual assault, parental loss, torture, graphic violence, and gun use. Please note that this is not a comprehensive list, and there are many other sensitive subjects discussed in the books, but those are the major overarching ones that we saw. So next, we thought we'd do a little bit of a book jacket synopsis, and of course, we're going to start with a little bit of cover talk. We can't really say much about the title Silver Elite other than to say it is related to the plot for our main character, Ren, and you will find out what it references.
The meaning of the title is pretty quickly revealed in the story, and I don't think it has any real symbolic significance other than its relevance to the plot. I will also add that I like the title, and I think it fits the novel well.
As far as the artwork goes, on the front you see these intertwining silver and blue lines. Honestly, before I even read the book, it kind of reminded me of DNA strands, which does align perfectly with what we learn right off the bat and how the modified came to be because of the biotoxin.
There's also a picture of a bird on the cover, and the meaning of that is revealed in the book pretty early on. I thought that was a nice touch to add to the cover. I won't tell you what it is, but again, not super symbolic, just something relevant to the main character. Also want to point out that the foreground is the bird and the silver and blue lines, but if you look at the background, I feel that it's also intentional because it's black with specks floating around in it, and it looks like how someone's mind looks when a mod makes a telepathic connection. And I appreciate that level of detailed tie-in.
While I do think that the cover art is unique and interesting, I will say I'm not a super fan of the fact that the author's name is like almost the same font size as the title. I don't know why, but I feel like it should be smaller, and that's probably just like a personal preference for like spatial harmony. But that was my only tiny little complaint, I guess.
So I actually hate you for saying that because I didn't even notice that, but you're absolutely right. And now that I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And I think the reason I dislike it is because it makes me feel like it's a continuation of the title because it's the same size. Like, I'm the title is Silver Elite Dani Francis. I'm like, wait, that's not right. But then I was like thinking about it. And if I wrote a book that people actually wanted to read, I want my name as big as a billboard, okay? I'd want my name bigger than the title. They're like, that's Addison's book? Yeah, we want to read it. We don't even care what the title is.
Addison. Just
Addison.
like that's the whole... The title's like literally on the spine, and that's it.
And Booked on Fantasy podcast really big, so you know where I came from.
All right, so that ends some cover talk. And now we do want to talk a little bit about controversy surrounding this book. If you've spent some time on social media and have heard about Silver Elite, then you're probably aware that there are several controversial things being discussed about it and circulating around, so we figured we'd lightly touch on some of those topics.
To clarify, we are not going to make this a political discussion or debate any of these issues in depth. We just want to talk about the book, and part of that discussion includes the controversy surrounding its release. So you do not need to buckle up or prepare for any political talk because we ain't here for that. We're here for the hot men.
So one of the main discussion points has been over the identity of the author. Dani Francis is a pen name, and many people speculate that the author is someone well-established within the book world. Speculations range from people thinking the author is genre hopping, belief that it could be someone trying to rebrand due to being, quote, problematic, or getting canceled. And there's also been a lot of speculation that perhaps this book was largely written by AI. Honestly, at this time, I just don't think that there is enough evidence out there to say for certain who it might be. So that is something I think we'll just have to wait on to find out. I do think it's perfectly normal for people to write under pen names, and I believe it's fairly common for authors to rebrand so they can write without any previous bias, especially when it comes to trying to switch genres. Now, if something problematic does end up coming up in regard to Dani Francis, I will, reevaluate, but there really hasn't been anything definitive. So I just don't feel like there's much to go on at this time.
I was a little surprised at how people reacted to the author using a pen name. I think we can all agree that everyone deserves privacy, and you can want to create something without having your face and real name attached to it, especially given the nature of society today with social media. I think we have all seen how absolutely wonderful social media can be and also how brutal it can be. And when you make something that reaches a broad fan base, it is a 100% guarantee there are going to be people who are unkind. That's just the reality of the world that we live in. And not everyone is resilient to that. And so I can sympathize with wanting to maintain your anonymity. I, of course, understand people's concerns that it's someone with a shady past trying to rebrand, but I actually think it's much more likely that it's just an unknown author who wants to remain that way, or it is a well-known author that wants to switch genres and is afraid of being typecast. And I totally get that. It would be really hard if you had a really successful series, especially early on in your career, and you wanted to branch out, but you know that people just can't help but compare your new work with your old. It's like musicians, right? Everybody always wants them to play their greatest hits and their old stuff, but they want to play something new. I totally get it. In terms of being written by AI, at this time, after reading it twice and rereading several sections multiple times, I just really don't think it is. I go back and forth because sometimes after, reading the news or whatever, I'm like, AI can do literally anything. And then I see things that AI produces and they're comically bad. I'm like, oh my God, like my 5-year-old could have done something better than that, And so based on nothing but my own experience, I do not feel like this book was written by AI. AI. I really don't.
That's fair, yeah.
Imagine it's a real person who worked really hard and is really passionate and excited about something they created, and people refusing to read it on the potential suspicion that maybe it's written by AI. That would really suck. Again, if we find out something later, we'll revisit. But for now, I think it's just a normal person who wrote a book and they want people to enjoy what they created.
That's generally how I feel too. But I will say, to spread some tea here, one person I could actually see Dani Francis being is Stephenie Meyer. If you read the acknowledgments at the end of the book, it says, Emily Archbold and Sam Bradbury, my tag team editing duo who are always happy to hop on a call to talk plot or to just argue about love triangles and Team Edward versus Team Jacob. There's no argument here. Edward, obviously, end quote, which I can totally see as compelling evidence of that. But honestly, that's like the only thing that could minorly indicate who Dani Francis might be. So purely speculative.
I did go down a little Reddit rabbit hole speculating who they think it is. The best evidence I saw was that it's Elsie Silver. She's a Canadian author.
I've heard of her.
And I think she's written some military romances, and there's some link to the author being Canadian or something. And I was like, guess what? It still doesn't matter. I'm still going to read it.
The next major topic is with regards to all the marketing surrounding the book from a publishing standpoint. Something I can totally understand frustration over is the fact that typically authors, and especially new authors, have to do so much work and self-promotion to get their books in front of an audience. Or at least that is what's been told to them from publishers. But Dani Francis has, as far as we know, done none of that and yet has gotten full support from a publishing standpoint. I've seen Barnes & Noble, for example, have Silver Elite like right at the front entrance section, depending on where you live. And clearly it took off across social media, meaning the publishing team put a lot of effort into marketing this book to ensure it made sales. And so I guess when you look at it from that perspective, I do see why authors and fans of smaller authors or indie authors are frustrated, because it shows that if a publisher really wants to, they can get a book sold regardless of an author's online presence or social media following and things like that. I will say, though, I feel like this point does circle back into the idea that this could be a well-known author already, because if the author has a track record of writing books that have gotten big, maybe a publisher would be more inclined to support them under a pen name. But I don't know. I'm pulling that out of my ass. I really don't know much about the publishing world. And this is all just information I've gathered from basic research. So
I totally agree. It does seem much more likely that a publisher would put more resources into an author with a track record of success over a completely new and unknown author. But who knows? To be honest, I also don't know a lot about the publishing process or how publishers operate in general, so I don't feel like I can confidently speak on it other than just to share the information that part of why the book generated so much buzz when it was released is because it was so heavily marketed, especially on TikTok, on Book Talk, Instagram, etc. So if you're on the fence of whether you want to read it or not, take from that what you will. It didn't dissuade me. I feel like if it was a total flop, it wouldn't have gotten that much pull. So that's why I kind of was like, the only way to find out is to read it.
I've seen equal amounts of positive and negative things. And so
Agreed.
I feel like it's just one of those books where, like, if you like it, you like it. If you don't like it, you really didn't like it. And that's just how it is. All right. So our final topic to discuss in this controversies section is some of the political undertones for the book.
So as promised earlier, we are a book podcast, not a political one. We're just here to present information that we have seen in regards to the book. I promise this is not going to turn into a political debate. We're just going to draw attention to the controversies we've seen surrounding the political undertones. There was a notable amount of complaints that the book had what is described as quote-unquote right-wing or quote-unquote conservative political undertones that many people found off-putting or even offensive. And I'm tentative to even use the words right-wing or conservative because everyone has a very different interpretation of what those words mean to them, especially in the current political landscape. Mm-hmm. In our spoiler discussion section, we will talk a little bit more about them in depth, but only as a commentary on how they fit into the story. Something I would say to anyone who wanted to read this book but was unsure because they read that it's political is this. This is a work of fiction. It is set in a dystopian society, and more than that, it's set in a heavily militarized dystopian society, and that context is going to be super important for you going into the book. There were only maybe 3 quotes that I clocked that I could definitely see why people were off-put by them, but a major theme of this book is that under great duress, societies lean into extremes. Think about any book, show, movie you've consumed where there has been a world-ending event. A lot of characters, a lot of groups lean into really major extremes, whether it be religious, cult, whatever. Think about Lord of the Flies, right? A classic novel. People lean into extremes in dire circumstances. And so I think that's important to remember. There aren't really good guys and bad guys, and both sides feel justified in their actions because they think they're fighting for the quote-unquote right side. There's a lot of, well, the ends justify the means in this book, and based on how the book ends, I actually feel like that's a theme that the main character will explore. So I don't want you to be weary of that, because definitely on a reread, I read it with that in mind, and I really didn't find it in the way that I feel like it's presented on social media, because I saw some really overt social media posts, and I don't feel like it read that way at all. I think that's a bit extreme. So I'm not going to read all of the quotes that Lorraine and I highlighted, but this is the one that I saw most often quoted on social media. And to clarify, to keep this spoiler free, I'm not going to say who or what context this quote is said. I'm just going to read the quote to you and then explain how it fits into the story, again, in a spoiler-free way. The quote is, "What happens down there goes beyond your uncle. Before the last war, there were penitentiaries all over the world. As a society, we house millions of criminals, clothe them, fed them, cold-blooded killers and child rapists living better lives than most free people. Even the ones who were sentenced to death were allowed to live for decades past their sentences. They ate 3 square meals a day, while those who hadn't killed or raped anyone could barely afford to eat. Evil, pilfering rare resources from the innocent citizens." I snort. "Weren't you the one lecturing me how life isn't fair? It isn't. All I'm saying is the squad serves a purpose now. Maybe in the old era, there was a place for mercy, but not anymore." So I can definitely see how out of context this definitely reads with some political undertones. However, for this quote specifically, the world in the story has experienced repeated cataclysmic natural disasters. We're talking about millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people who have been killed or displaced. Whole continents have disappeared from the map. And so this caused a domino effect of natural resources being scarce. And in that world, I would imagine a lot of people's perspectives would shift, and they would find it unfair that prisoners are being fed and housed when there are literal wars going on in the world over scarce resources. And so I think that context is important to remember when you come across quotes like this. And I feel like a lot of the negative reviews, they like to quote these quotes and give absolutely no context. And I feel like that's not fair to the body of work.
I would agree with that. In general, I see the implied message from these quotes, but I would say this ideology was added in to demonstrate one organization's side of thinking. I definitely wouldn't say the larger message of the book leaned into that ideology necessarily, though. If anything, it just presents grayness on the front of which group is right versus wrong, and that you're seeing that both sides within this book, the groups and organizations that you see, engage in behaviors that are not morally right. So that's how I took it.
At the end of the day, if you're worried about the political undertones, here's a way to go into it, kind of knowing what you're getting into. I think it's important to remember that you need to take the quotes in the setting, time, place, and history of the world in the book. And I think they demonstrate an ideology that the author imagines would prevail in that kind of society. And to me, that doesn't feel like a worldview that the author was pushing on the readers, just a worldview they're trying to present in the narrative that they've created.
So, moving on to our book rating and review. As noted, this is going to remain spoiler-free. So, here is my rating. To be honest, I am going to give this book a 3.5 overall, I being Lorraine. Was the writing super compelling? No. Did I feel particularly attached to the MC?
Wow.
No. Did I still enjoy it and find myself wanting to see what happens and gasp at some unexpected twists? Yes. I wouldn't say this evoked the same attachment or love for a series like The Hunger Games, like Throne of Glass or Fourth Wing has for me, but I did enjoy it as one of those fluffy books that you read between other series that require more mental and emotional investment. And I see that with literally no judgment. There's nothing wrong with reading a fluffy book because they're entertaining, and sometimes you just want to read books that are purely for entertainment, right? So if y'all have listened to our deep dives, then I'm sure you know how freaking much we get into these books and talk about the tiniest of details. So honestly, it's nice to read a book where I didn't feel compelled to overthink so much. So
damn, that stung a little bit. All right, guys, don't read the book according to Lorraine.
This is an honest review, okay?
I know. No, we pride ourselves in integrity and honesty, okay? And we're going to tell you what we really think. But you know what's funny? I wrote retweets, so I think I feel the same.
Exactly.
No, but I mean, reality, sometimes it's really nice just to get caught up in a story and go along for a ride. I was actually afraid that I couldn't turn off my brain when I read books anymore because I have literally rewired myself for our deep dives. But I am delighted to say I only correctly clocked one of the major twists in the book. And that was actually really fun for me. It was nice for me to be like, oh, what? And just enjoy the spice.
I would also like to add, I think my initial impression was tainted by the fact that I felt like the marketing was misleading for the book. Something you saw quite a lot of in regards to Silverlee is that it's the Hunger Games for adults, quote unquote. And to be honest, I don't feel that was accurate. There are some things about the setup of the continent and the words that are similar to like the districts of the Hunger Games. And yes, it's dystopian, but in my opinion, I would say it's like lightly dystopian because the stakes on paper kind of sounded high, but I didn't feel like the emotional impact of those stakes. I don't know how to explain it, so that's what I'll say for now. But if you do want to read it, just make sure you keep in mind that this is not the Hunger Games, so like don't rely on that marketing to convince you, because it's common for people to use popular books as a reference point when promoting books because it makes decision making easy and it gives like an anchor, but it should be done accurately, or I think it sets up false expectations for readers. And in this case, I feel like this was an example of misleading marketing.
I'm really glad you brought that up, actually, because I have read both Hunger Games and Divergent in their entirety, and I do not for one single second understand the Hunger Games comparison at all. Not in the emotional impact, not in the world building, not in the plot. I truly cannot think of a legitimate parallel. To be honest, from my perspective, it actually is significantly more like Divergent, and I will not give any spoilers for Divergent because Lauren has not read it, and we don't know who else hasn't read it. But if you have, which I think probably a lot of us millennials probably did, but I would even argue the author was inspired by elements of the Divergent series when writing this. I'm not implying that they copied off Veronica Roth or ripped off her series in any way, but there were a lot more parallels for the Divergent series to me. So yeah, when I read Hunger Games and I started reading this, I'm like, this ain't nothing like the Hunger Games. Like, I don't know what they're talking about, but not even a little bit. And I would also argue that Hunger Games and Divergent are nothing alike either, other than the fact that they're set in the future where the world is bad. That being said, I'm going to give it a 3.75 stars out of 5. The story was fast-paced and easy to read, and I liked a lot of the characters and the dynamic they had with each other. I am also a sucker for training sequences. I have no idea why, but I love them. I like them in sports movies. I like them in Divergent, in the Hunger Games. I recently saw F1 with Brad Pitt, and there's lots of training stuff in there, and I don't know why. I'm just like obsessed with that kind of shit. Anyway.
Fourth Wing's a great example.
Fourth Wing, yes, exactly. Totally. I thought it had lots of exciting twists and intrigue, and I think it's a very solid first book in a series that I'm excited to see where it goes. My biggest hang-up, which we'll discuss more in depth, and the likes and dislikes, is the notable lack of emotional investment. I didn't feel invested in the main characters, and I'm not actually really sure I even really liked them very much. Like, I love them, but I don't like them. You know what I mean? I'm rooting for them, but I'm not deeply invested in them and their character growth and their journey, at least not yet. It was really missing the emotional punch for me, and I like to be emotionally damaged.
Obviously, these are our opinions, and you have things that you like in books, and you have things that you want, and so take our opinions with a grain of salt, I guess.
Don't. Mine is definitely right. Just kidding.
Next, we're gonna get into some likes and dislikes. I'll start with my likes. I thought the overall world and plot concept was interesting. I really enjoy science fiction, and so the idea that a biotoxin from a war could create a mutation that, causes people to become modified was compelling to me. I haven't read many books where telepathy and various mind-related powers are front and center, so that felt very new and different to me. Next, while I wasn't that drawn to Ren as a FMC, I did love Kane as a side character. I won't say anything else about him, but he was my favorite character by far. I also enjoyed the various trading tasks because those were very entertaining, and I liked the action involved in them. Considering my overall rating, I will say I found a fair number of the twists to be pretty shocking and unexpected, and I felt there was a good balance of things that were predictable with things that were totally not. So that was something I was pleasantly surprised by. Last but not least, while I did find the way the romance unfolded to be pretty cheesy and standard, I did still enjoy it. It wasn't really enemies to lovers per se, but there was some tension to help, build up the anticipation. So
I'll echo what Lorraine said. I also haven't read many books, or really any at all, that I can think of where telepathy and other mind powers are in the forefront of the plot. So that was actually really cool to see. The closest thing I could think of was 11 from Stranger Things, but even that I feel like is pretty distantly related. So I was like, yeah, this is a pretty refreshing concept, at least for me. And I thought the author actually did an excellent job with that part of the world building, right? The explanation of how it works and the descriptions and everything I thought were really good, which is good. Writing systems of, I don't know, call it magic, but systems of magic or power can be really difficult, and keeping that consistent can be hard. And I thought that she did a good job. It made logical sense. So I like that. As a millennial who was raised on Divergent and the Hunger Games series, I am a sucker for anything dystopian, so this book really had a leg up for me already right out of the gate. I really enjoyed the supporting characters, one in particular who I think Lauren and I both loved, who we will talk about at length, especially in the spoiler section. I did really enjoy the plot twists, as I mentioned earlier. I only correctly clocked one out of several, and it felt good to get to the end and be like, oh my God, what did I just read? What? Have my mind blown. I liked that. I felt like there were a lot of good plot setups and foreshadowing hints about various things throughout the book that make me excited to read the next book to see where the plot goes. I think there are lots of little Easter eggs planted. And overall, I just think the world building in general was pretty good, not just with the powers and the system of magic, but the overall world she created I thought was interesting. I don't know a lot about the military, so to me, I'm like, yeah, this seems about right. Yeah, okay, like a future militaristic vibe. This sounds pretty accurate. I was like, oh yeah, this is cool as fuck. So
all right, next we'll get into some of our dislikes. I can't quite put my finger on what exactly caused this feeling, but something about the writing just felt kind of hollow to me, especially when it came to character development. I felt like there would be these shocking events that should have amped up my emotions, and honestly, I would do a quick oh no, and then I would just move on. And they didn't hit me quite like they should, especially considering this is supposed to be set in a dystopian world. Along a similar vein, the theme, at least for me, hasn't necessarily been super compelling. And I have realized that I'm a theme queen. I love strong symbolism and a nicely woven story where character actions and plot events really develop and tie into a strong, compelling theme. And thus far, outside of the fact that there's this idea that both sides have done things that are bad, I can't definitively be like, oh, I get what the theme is right now. But I will say that this is only book one, so I'm hoping that the next books will build into or clarify a stronger theme. Next, this is a very random thing, but I think there was honestly too much exposition. I often felt like the world building information was offered in a very factual, no inference required way that just sometimes took me out of the story. While I do appreciate that this made everything super easy to understand for my brain, I do like making inferences or using small details or nuance to pick up on the tone or piece together the world than having everything kind of just handed and laid out straight for you. But knock on wood with that, because if y'all listen to our Onyx Storm review, then you guys know the opposite was stated. And that was an example of something we felt there was not enough exposition. So consider me Goldilocks. Apparently, I like a good middle of the road balance when it comes to exposition, I guess. So next, touched on this a little bit. Ren as an FMC, to be honest, I felt a lot of her was just kind of inconsistent and somewhat annoying at times. While she does self-declare as an impulsive, reckless person, I felt this character trait was too often used to provide action and, I guess, keep the story moving. And it got a little bit old for me after too many times of that. I just felt like there was maybe a little too much time spent on this back and forth over Ren trying to decide what she was ultimately going to do. And that just kind of caused me to be very frustrated with her.
That's fair. I have seen some very valid criticisms of her character. I have a little bit of a defense, which we'll talk about, but I definitely understand that. I actually specifically in regards to that one, I started to write it as one of my dislikes, but I feel pulled in either direction on it because in a way, I think the character is well written because she is a 20-year-old girl that had a traumatizing childhood and lives in a pretty messed up society. And I think her mental state is pretty accurate and reflective of what that would actually look like. I think I would actually need the second book before I can truly decide how I feel feel about the issue, right? I want to see some
That's
growth.
fair,
I want to
yeah.
see her take some lessons from what happens in the book. So take
We'll
that
see. Yeah.
with a grain of salt. Yeah. I will caveat most of my dislikes by saying this is the first book in what is supposed to be a trilogy, and it definitely reads like a first book, which is not a bad thing. I've read enough series to know that sometimes I rate the first book lower and then I read the rest of the series, and usually I will retroactively raise my grading because I better understand how the first book fits into the story. ACOTAR, huge example of that for me. I remember reading A Court of Thorns and Roses, and I was like, I don't really get it. What's everyone's big deal? I guess I'm just not anything else to read. And then by the time I finished the second book, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I understand. So that happens.
Yeah,
kind of same for TOG too, right? The farther you get with a character, you're like, it was all part of their journey,
Right,
So-
right. Yeah.
My biggest complaint is that I was missing an emotional connection to the characters. And I feel like the character growth, especially for Ren, was missing something. I just didn't feel invested in her journey. When I read, I want to feel a connection to at least the main character. And I felt like that was really missing for me. There were a few moments where things would happen and I would start to feel it, but I didn't quite lock in with her. And I want to. I really want that.
Yeah.
I want to make fetch happen. I'm trying to make it happen. This is my last dislike. I also thought the plot was a tiny bit chaotic. It felt like something would happen and then boom, the next thing would happen. And then another thing. And it almost felt like I was being plot bombed. It was like, don't pay attention to this. Look over here. Look over here.
Yes. That's a great way to explain. Yes. Yes. Plot bombed.
Yes. Plot bombed. I know I'm going to start incorporating that into our other episodes because I'm like, oh, damn, plot bombed.
Nice.
I'm like, I came up with something fresh as fuck. So if you're going to use that phrase, please just tag us in social media and be like, oh, Addison came up with plot bombed. I just felt like there wasn't a lot of processing time for things that would happen, not only for me as a reader, but for the main character. And there's a fine line between fast paced and exciting and just the train is off the tracks, the brake is broken, and we're heading towards a cliff. Felt like a little more rampant pace.
I would agree with that. All right, so this brings us to our final portion of the spoiler-free book review, and that is, would we recommend it? Here is what I'll say. If you want a fluffy military romance set in a slightly dystopian world with action, then yeah, go for it. I think as long as you go in with the right expectations and you know you're reading for entertainment, you'll probably enjoy it. However, if you want compelling characters, strong themes, and you really want to develop an emotional attachment to the book, then no, skip this and read something else.
Oh, you're ruthless, baby. Sorry, guys, this is a little new for us because every book that we've covered has pretty much been in a deep dive or one that we knew we were going to love. So it's new for us to cover a book that we weren't totally obsessed with. So I feel like we're being mean, but we're really not trying to be because we're dedicating the whole episode to it. So obviously we liked it enough to do that,
Yeah, I wouldn't have finished the book if I didn't at least like it.
That's true. I just want everybody to feel like we're slamming it, and I feel like we're slamming it. That's not my intention at all.
I'm not slamming it.
No, I don't. I know. I think I just feel bad because I'm like, someone worked so hard to write this and I want to love it. I wanted to love everything about it.
Okay, but I'm sure there's plenty of people that listen to us in this podcast and they're like, you know what? They're not for us. And they just move on with their life. And
that's not true.
Everyone that gets put out there for public consumption is going to be subject to scrutiny. And I don't feel like we're being rude about it. I think we're just presenting the things that we've noticed. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying don't read it. Go in with the right expectations and I think you'll be fine. If you disagree with me, that's fine too.
Yeah, then you can catch these hands, okay? I agree with everything you said, except for the fact that people listen to our podcast and they don't like it. I don't think that's true. I think everybody likes it.
I'm being a realist, okay?
You are. I don't like that. Can you be a dreamer,
This is Lori.
please?
You know what? I'm not Lori.
Damn it, Lori.
Today.
Damn it. You should have told me I could have prepared myself. Lori is Lorraine's alter ego. She's bad. She's a bad girl.
She's a mischievous freak.
Oh my God. Okay. Would Addison recommend this book? The short answer is yes. The long answer is, and I think this is true of literally any book, expectation setting is super important. If you go into this thinking it's going to be like the Hunger Games, then you're going to be fucking disappointed. If you go into this hoping to be emotionally ruined, you're going to be disappointed. But if you go into this thinking, I'm going to read a fast-paced and exciting story with some very enjoyable spice and some fun side characters, then I think you're going to be happy. And if you are really into Western ranching and shit, you're also going to love this book.
Okay, so this officially concludes our spoiler-free section. If you do not want any spoilers, make sure that you stop here. You
Read
have
the
been
book
warned.
and then come back. Yes.
Yes.
We are going to talk about everything now. The characters, the plots, everything. We just want to be so clear. If I get a mean message, it's like, you spoiled it. I'm going to be like, girl, you didn't listen.
All right, let's talk spoilers. Starting with a little bit of additional book cover analysis. The other thing I wanted to note about the book cover is that the little silver and blue lines are, I think, ultimately meant to represent the silver veins of the modified. They could also be like the links, maybe, that the modified create between each other when they communicate. In addition, as Addison mentioned, we do see that white bird in the middle of the cover. I am assuming that is a dove and is in reference to the nickname / the call name that Ren gets in the book. So next, we kind of wanted to dive into some of the general world building and some of the history of the world, and we'll kind of like piece together our thoughts as we recall some of that information. Starting with world building, where we are in the book, the continent is ruled under a military organization called the Company, and we know this is headed by General Redden. The general, of course, hates the modified, and as such, has implemented a regime that treats the aberrant terribly. Once he took over, he killed and imprisoned many modified, and also marked the aberrant with black bands to signal loyalty and or with red bands to indicate a prisoner status. One very significant historical event was the Silver Blood Purge, where tens of thousands of modified were killed, and only modified that were considered useful were spared. For example, Jade Valance. There are also loyalist modified people within the command who perform various tasks like assisting the general, healing people, and being used to train and test primes. I found these details to be interesting because it does blur the line about allegiances and forces the reader to consider why a modified person would work for a cause that actively tries to kill them. And simply put, I think a lot of it comes down to fear. I think it's easy to look at Jade Valance, for example, and be like, she's this horrible, awful person. And don't get me wrong, she definitely does terrible things. But I would imagine if your choice is to live but work for the general or die, I can see why someone would choose to live. Personally, I feel like there would be too much cognitive dissonance if I was a modified person who was loyal to the command, but based on what Jade tells Ren at the Jubilee, there seems to be something deeper going on with the uprising and the modified, which we'll also talk more about later as well.
I'm glad you brought up Jade Valance specifically because what we learned from her is very telling in a limited way about why someone modified would choose to work for an oppressive regime. The most obvious reason a mod would work for the company is self-preservation, which I totally get. I have a feeling, as you mentioned, based on what she tells Ren, there's something more going on ideologically speaking, and there's a dissonance between the uprising and the command. And so I am interested to explore that more in the next book.
And of course, we're also looking at this book from Ren's POV, and Ren doesn't know very much.
She doesn't know anything.
Right, about what's going on with the
literally.
Literally. So there is that to consider as well. So another significant historical event was the bombing at Valterra Ridge, where an entire modified community was wiped out by the general's forces.
This seems to be a pretty significant historical touchpoint because it gets referenced several times throughout the book. I think there's more at play there than just the bombing itself. And we'll discuss that more in depth later when we talk about Ren's parents.
Right. Yes. In addition, we see that the political environment has been quite rocky with the previous president of the continent, President Severn, who was a modified person. Severn believed mods were a superior new race and had enacted a revengeful regime. He decided to treat primes as despicably as the modified have been treated under General Redden's regime now as well. There's basically been an ongoing war between primes and modifieds for the last 150 years so far. I think thematically this is leading us to remember that historical context is important, and it seems like both sides have a checkered record with respect to human rights.
Can I tell you something that's like on topic but also off topic?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why, but every time I read the name Severn, my brain autocorrected it to Snape. So I kept picturing Snape from Harry Potter in this book, President Snape.
Severus Snape.
Which was just like so incongruous. But every time my brain would do it, I'm like, no. Can you imagine Snape in this world?
No, absolutely not.
Oh my God. Snape riding a horse.
I love that.
I know Snape and Severn, they're not even spelled that closely. I just saw like
I honestly
big
thought
S.
you were going to say Severance, like the show, like Severance.
I haven't watched that, actually.
Oh,
I should,
dang.
but I never have time. I never done do anything. Okay. The conversation Ren has with Lash about his father is a good example of this. Lash is another member in Black Cell in the Silver Block Training Program. Lash's father was a top student, but was forced to work in sanitation until the regime changed, and then his talents were recognized and he became a surgeon. Lash indicates that only mods who had healing powers were allowed to be doctors. And so I think you're absolutely right that context is important to remember, because the world building is not just the primes have been oppressing mods for 150 years because they were different. It's not always been good versus evil. It's both sides that made bad choices.
In terms of Ren, we see that while she is aberrant, she doesn't necessarily automatically hate all primes, and there are good primes in existence. For example, Tana's father, Griff, works for the Uprising and obviously protects Tana since she is modified. Ren also generally opposes using her modified abilities such as mind reading or incitement on people because she hates the idea of impeding on someone's free will or invading their privacy.
There are multiple times when Ren feels conflicted about the relationship she has with the prime characters because she's supposed to quote unquote hate them, but she often has thoughts that indicate she knows that there are good primes and bad primes, just like there are good mods and bad mods. And I think Ren is supposed to represent this middle gray area between two really strong ideological perspectives.
So next, we want to get into some of the history of the world. So there was a war 150 years ago during which a biotoxin was released that resulted in some people developing special abilities, thus becoming modified. This toxin also appears to have affected other animals and plants in the world, causing mutations to them. For example, we have animals like white coyotes, horned bears, and then there was that dagger stone that was found in the cave when Cross and Ren go on a date. I believe due to the toxin and many of the natural disasters occurring in the world, many common items have had to be recreated synthetically, such as like alcohol and even flowers. There was a quote that said, "I remember learning in school how these cave systems began to get discovered about 50 years after the last war. So many things died from the bombing, the radiation, and never grew back. In the Blacklands, I saw hybrid plants that never existed before the war, bears with horns, trees whose roots grew up and outward rather than into the ground. Daggerstone is one of those anomalies."
Also, just important for world building, it also affected their ability to produce paper products because trees never grew back quite the same. So as a society, they heavily rely on electronic communication, and Ren even thinks about how she would kill to have a paper book because they're so extremely rare.
Next, the general claims that prior to the last war, overpopulation was a serious problem. We wouldn't have gotten to that dire point. And there's part of that quote, we wouldn't have gotten to that dire point to global conflict, to 7 continents devastated, 4 of them raised or underwater, if it weren't for all the people battling over dwindling resources.
And based on the descriptions in the map provided in the book, the wards seem like they're in North America. And so in general for the world building, there's only a few remaining continents, and we don't even know if those are fully accessible or the same size landmass as like what we think of when we think of the continents now.
To touch again on General Redden's ideology, he was not a fan of how society operated in the, quote, old era, and has since been trying to turn everyone into members of a productive and efficient society. There's a quote that said, "The general is obsessed with correcting the mistakes of the old era. That's all my brothers and I ever heard growing up, how humanity destroyed itself, letting chaos reign. Encouraging learned helplessness. Kids were in school until their 20s, adults too. All these pathetic assholes wasting time, wasting resources. If you're not productive, you're destructive." This is a point that I would say seems kinda inconsistently demonstrated because, for example, I feel like the general kind of only seems to care about crime that steals from the company. This is why Silver Elite was tasked with looking into Reed and how he's been stealing medical supplies. And yet they kind of also leave underground brothels up and running for information. And I guess because it's not necessarily like disruptive to society in terms of garnering a lot of attention. But regardless, details like this definitely help paint a picture of General Redden's approach to governing the continent, and that he has developed kind of an authoritarian structure of leadership.
Yeah, I disagree a little bit on the crime thing because it seems like he is pretty consistently against crime in general. I do see the example you're saying about how he lets like the underground brothel continue to run. I just feel like everything in the society is so utilitarian. The clothes are a good example of that, right? All the textiles that are mass produced are plain black, white, gray, or navy. And anything else you got to spend a ton of Lex credits on. I think the point about the underground underground brothels actually falls into that thinking because they are productive to the company and getting information about other illicit activities, right? I feel like a lot of times, even in our society, they let certain criminals or criminal enterprises continue because it's a valuable place to gather information about much broader and larger problems. So I don't know. Overall, it's an authoritarian regime, and that's what you need to know.
Yeah.
And there's no creativity or expression. Everyone has to wear plain clothes, and it's boring.
This kind of like loops into my earlier dislike about how I felt like on paper the stakes read like they should be really high, but somehow because of a lack of emotional connection, I didn't feel like there was much of an emotional impact to some of these things. So this is where this point came from. I would have liked to see more of how, I guess, like the general's ideology affected people on a day-to-day basis living in the wards. I personally didn't feel like this was adequately expressed enough for me to like truly understand the dystopian nature of the world. We are told that this is the case, and yet for the most part, all of our characters seem to be living moderately well, or if they weren't, we didn't really hear about it. Society is definitely stratified by wealth, and we know the upper echelons of society own many of the businesses and have access to all of these lux credits. But I don't know, at least for me personally, I felt there was kind of a lack of examples to demonstrate this outside of it being told that this was the case.
I actually think the issue isn't that people in the wards live quote unquote bad lives. I think the society is designed so that everyone has like food, clothes, etc., basic necessities. The oppressive part is their treatment and subsequent killing of mods, and more importantly, how controlling the general is. There are a lot of conversations that happen even with primes, like in the training program, where they're like, yeah, the general can be a bit overbearing. Of course, there are definitely wealthy elites who benefit from aligning with the general, but I don't think it's an issue like it is in the Hunger Games, where everyone in the wards are starving and denied access to basic necessities, like the capital versus the districts. I think what people are really wanting to rebel against is the lack of autonomy. There are a lot of world building descriptions where people are just assigned jobs, or like Ren's Ranch was just reassigned. Like the company at any point in time can just be like, hey, you're going to live on a fishing boat. Oh, you're welcome. They have food and clothes, right? They're not starving. They're not wanting for medicine or whatever. But I mean, if I didn't have autonomy, I would hate that. I think we all would, right? And so I think that's kind of more the issue.
So next, we thought we'd get into some of the geographic information that we learned as well. Everything west of Ward Z is underwater, and there aren't any communities on the coast. Every time the company tries to rebuild out there, another earthquake hits and destroys an entire town or village. And details like this definitely establish that the general world is very unstable, unpredictable, and unsafe thanks to volatile weather and natural disasters. We also are exposed to a continent called Tierra Fe. This is south of the main one that the company and the command and everything exists on. Tierra Fe is a place that they trade goods with. However, the trade treaty between the continent and Tierra Fe has been on shaky grounds for many years. But there's a quote that says, at least it prevented a war, though. When those first mods started coming into existence in the years after the last war, Tierra Fe almost waged another one on us. They thought we were demons from hell, and a religious war nearly broke out among the remaining continents. It was the continent's ruler at the time who managed to thwart it, a prime who assured Tierra Fe's leadership that the aberrant would be contained. We'll talk more about Tierra Fe later, but for now, they are definitely another group that hates the modified and only seems to have a truce with the company as long as the modified are contained, aka they don't come to their territory, is what that sounds like. We are also exposed to a location called Korora, and this is another continent that has cut themselves off from all human contact. And there's been no communication between there and the company in over 100 years. The command has been unable to install an outpost there because anytime an aircraft or ship has traveled that way, it hasn't returned. Our characters do discuss this area, and during one conversation, there's a quote that said, what other reason would they have to erase themselves from the map? They haven't, though. They're right here. I swirl my finger over the projection. From civilization, then, he demands. Nobody chooses to cut themselves off from all human contact for anything other than nefarious reasons. I could definitely see Crora as being some sort of place where new biotoxins are being developed, or just something nefarious is going on there that could cause problems in the next book. On the other hand, it could be nothing and just be a place where people still practice old era ways like the faithful or something like that. So I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence about how important it will be, I guess.
Yeah, I clocked that conversation about Cora as well as something suspicious that I feel is likely to get explored in this series at some point. There's too little information about it, and that makes it a little more suspicious for me.
I feel like whenever you start a new book, you kind of have to adapt to that author's style of how they foreshadow and how they give details and stuff like that. And I feel like I'm still trying to work that out because we'll talk about some of the twists and stuff too, obviously, when we get there. But some of that stuff I felt like was foreshadowed, but there was also other twists that I was kind of like, where did this come from? And
That's fair.
I'm getting this sense right now, and it really depends on how the next book goes, but I feel like sometimes we get these things and it could be a red herring. It could also be important, but I just really not sure.
Yeah.
And it could equally go either way, I'm
going to totally call myself out here and tell you, I think I was too zoomed in on the minutia. I mean, we'll talk about this when we get there, but I totally forgot that Jade was a precog and that she could see visions of the future, even though there's an entire scene.
Yes,
in hindsight, you're like, wow, that is definitely screaming in the face foreshadowing that that's going to happen to Ren. And when it happened to Ren, I was like, oh, what? Yeah,
right.
Or, the twist with Kane being the hotshot pilot. There's so much foreshadowing for that. Didn't even occur to me.
Yes, Kane was one that I actually caught on to. He was the one thing in this book that I felt like I didn't. Was picking up on. Everything else I felt like was like, what the fuck?
So, I missed all the obvious foreshadowing. And then, meanwhile, there's one line about Karor, and I'm like, that's going to be super important. Trust me.
That's why. I just know. I'm really in the middle about a lot of this stuff right now. So I guess we'll see. Anyways, moving on, okay? The Blacklands. So the Blacklands are known to be a lightless, dangerous place where things like quicksand pits and stuff exist. And of course, you have like the horned bears and other dangerous animals lurking around. Ren spent a considerable amount of time in her childhood years living in the Blacklands with Uncle Jim. And although it's mostly dark there are light pockets where you can get access to sunlight, though it's usually only for a few hours at a time. One of the quotes that I had pulled for this, there's something wrong with the way the light reflects in the Blacklands, as in it doesn't. Everything is black, always. Jim and I learned that lesson when he tried to bring various light sources on our hunting excursions. Flashlights didn't work, torches, even his lighter. Something I do wonder is whether the command will invade through the Blacklands in the next book, because we learned that they were having a defense manufacturer called Rem develop special rifles designed to work in low light conditions. Also, totally random side note, I thought Ren and Xavier's journey through the Blacklands to get to the Uprising base was going to be way more intense than it was. That scene was a little bit disappointing to me, I will say.
That's so funny because I actually loved it. I love Xavier Ford. I think I'm going to be a big fan of him. Like the little bit of time we got with him.
Yeah, as a character.
Okay.
But I'm just talking about that scene where they like go through the Blacklands. I thought it was just going to be way crazier and they were going to be like getting attacked left and right because it's supposed to be this dangerous place that nobody wants to go in, I mean, obviously Ren, I'm assuming, helped a lot with that because she knows how to navigate through it. I was just expecting more action out of that scene, I think. So
that's fair. But I will say Jim and Ren did survive there for 3 years when Ren was a child between the ages of 5 and 8. So it can't be so dangerous. Otherwise, that part of the story would be super unrealistic. I actually kind of wasn't surprised they made it through with little to no issues, honestly.
Interesting.
I see what you're saying, though.
Moving on to a little bit of discussion of the structure of the continent and the company. So the company is a military organization, and their military force is known as the Command, which is divided into different blocks. We learned that Tin Block enforces the laws, and Bren's parents were part of Tin Block before they were discovered to be traitors. Copper and Gold blocks patrol the streets, and I kind of think of Silver Block as like the FBI or the CIA of this world. They undergo very special missions. They operate kind of differently. And there was a quote that said, "Our skills are better utilized for more critical duties. Our mission is to locate faithful camps, to disband them, to detect criminal enterprises within our cities, and dismantle them, to rid our streets and wards of silverbloods." We also learned that the company has established living and working areas called wards that produce different items for the company. At the start of the book, Wren has been in Ward C, an asset ward, which is more agriculturally focused, and citizens are allowed to own weapons. That's why Uncle Jim trained Wren how to use a gun and shoot. The villages and cities within wards are operated by controllers and soldiers. I will say, again, totally random, for whatever reason, when we are first introduced to Wren being a rancher and riding a horse in the dystopian world, something about that really clashed in my mind, and I was not vibing with it. But now, having read the book, it makes more sense to me, like, retroactively. I guess the best way to describe how it looked in my brain is how the Jackson, Wyoming settlement looked in season 2 of Last of Us, except with military command stations everywhere in the area too.
You know, I had the exact same experience. I don't know why, but it felt really jarring the first time I was reading it. I was like, the fuck? Why are there horses and cattle and she's fixing a fence and like all this branching stuff? And I don't know why.
Gotta shoot a coyote.
Well, like, it makes perfect sense though, right? Because even in a dystopian society, they need food, right? They have to grow their agricultural farming, etc. But I agree. I was just kind of like, what the fuck am I reading? But I adjusted quite quickly. And by the second read, it felt organic to the world and her characters. I think I'm used to dystopians that take place in a city. And so I was just
that's probably what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not bad. It's just, I don't know. It was just unexpected for me. Different. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In addition, we also know that the natural disasters and population decline have caused the original 26 wards to have been rezoned down to 18 remaining wards. Last but not least, we know that the only system of justice on the continent is through the tribunal, composed of a small council of men and women who decide on the spot what an accused's fate will be with very little background. The only outcome for a guilty charge are going to a labor camp or death. This is pretty extreme. The fact that those are the only options is crazy to think about because people being charged get no legal representation or a fair trial. Rights that we enjoy in the real world. All right. So next, we of course would like to talk about the modified and get into some of the details that we learn about them. All modified can communicate via telepathy by opening a path to another modified, following a positive energy wave, which is the second frequency in somebody's brain. This establishes what is called a link. Once links are formed, it can be accessed from anywhere, but an initial link must be established in person. However, that's not always the case, as we see with Wren and Cross spontaneously linking as children. It's common for young modified children to spontaneously link with others because they don't yet have good control over their power. Almost all modified veins turn silver when they communicate telepathically, except for a rare few, like Wren, whose veins don't change. All telepaths have a unique energy signature that becomes recognizable to another once a link is formed. We also learned that the voice that you hear as a telepath will sound different from the same person's voice when they speak out loud. And this was definitely important to remember for me as probably a major reason for why Wren didn't recognize Cross a lot sooner as being Wolf and like the whole little twisty twist around that. So next, we know that modified people have two brain frequencies. The positive one is for speaking, while the negative one is for listening. Particularly strong modifieds will develop what is called a blood mark, and it can appear anywhere on their body. For example, Jade Balance has one on her cheek, and then Wren's is on her upper thigh/hip area. Wren has a thought that stated she'd never known a modified person with a blood mark to have any less than 3 abilities. Last but not least, we also know that mods have perfect eyesight and they don't need glasses. Must be nice.
Retweet.
All right. So next, we also wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of modified. So we know that there are projectors. Projectors can only show something that they are actively seeing or looking at. So they cannot make you see something that they are not actively like thinking about or seeing themselves. We know that Wren, Declan, and I think Adrian are some of the characters who can project. We also have mind readers. Mind readers can only read what someone is actively thinking about, which is why people can decoy their minds to think about something distracting to try to hide important information that they may be thinking about. We know that Wren, Jade Balance, and Amira are mind readers. Healers, I find their abilities to be super interesting because they can detect not only trauma from current injuries, but they can also pick up on early signs of illness that someone may have, which I thought was kind of cool. I found it interesting that after Ren is healed, she described her whole body as feeling much more positive. And I don't think that she said sparkly in the book, but like she just felt its effects like radiating through her. I don't remember the exact wording for it, but do you remember that part?
Yes, I
Where
do.
she was talking about it. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, she felt like she had 2 glasses of champagne on an empty stomach.
Yeah, she's just like feeling bubbly and
Feeling
great
bubbly.
again.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah. And Ellis was the most prominent healer character, and he worked for the command as a loyalist to General Redden, but we also learned that he actually was working for the uprising. Dun, dun, dun. Next, we have empaths. Empaths can only feel someone's emotions, but they cannot manipulate or change what someone is feeling. It also seems limited to something you can only do with physical contact. Our character that we knew for sure that had this ability was Fatima, and she was secretly working for the uprising and was tragically killed by Ro, that little shit. Next, we also have precogs. So it seems like with precogs, they have to like specifically focus on someone, and that's why Jade didn't pick up on Ren working for the uprising sooner. Is that kind of your understanding of what happened with that?
Yes and no. We really don't get very much information on how their ability works. To me, it seems like their visions are very random and spontaneous, but they have to have some kind of proximity or connection to them, right? Had Jade never met Ren or been in proximity to her, I don't think she would have ever gotten a random vision of her. Otherwise,
True.
Why would Jade not be getting a vision of Julian Ash and hiding in Wordsea? But again, I don't think we'll know until we get further into the series. And also, not to mention, there could be different kinds of precogs, right? There could be ones that do get random visions or, we have no
True,
idea.
that's fair.
She could
That's fair.
expand that and have nuances to each ability as well. I also have to call myself out on the precog thing because the scene where they line up all the recruits and Jade announces that she had a vision of one of the recruits who's going to fuck up and get a bunch of soldiers killed, and then they cut her from the program. On a first read, I read that and it completely left my mind. And then when Jade shows up in the pantry and told Ren she saw a vision of her, I was like, oh, how did she do that? I literally forgot that she could see the future.
How?
And then on the reread, I was like, yeah, that's pretty fucking obvious. It is clearly a setup for Jade seeing a vision of Ren.
That's fair, and I had the same shock. I didn't see that coming at all, but honestly, I think I dismiss it because Ren passed, like, the initial test with her. She was screened by her, and, like, Jade mentions that when they have their final little convo at the Jubilee. But I think because of that, I was like, oh, Ren's fine. She's immune to the precog visions.
Oh, you know what? That's probably, like, you feel like
case.
she has some, like, mental armar built in against Jade.
Right, yeah, because I was like, well, she
fair.
passed. She didn't catch her, so can't get got.
She can't get got.
That was not the case.
I knew you were going to say that.
Another type of modified that we have is an inciter. These people have the ability to influence people to basically do anything. Based off of how Ren describes her experience with inciting, it seems like people won't necessarily realize what's happening to them until obviously it's too late. And it's not like they hear the inciter's voice in their head. Obviously, Ren is the only inciter that we know of thus far.
It does seem like, based on this book, that the inciters are incredibly rare and highly valued because even the uprising was looking into who the inciter was at Jim's execution. So I found that to be noticeable. And it's the one thing that Jim made Ren promise to literally never tell anyone. I do actually have a question about the inciting later that we'll talk about when we get there. But yeah, so I'm going to clock inciting as like being super significant.
And last but not least, we have a mind fracture or a rewire. I don't really know what the correct term is here, but this is an ability that we also don't know much about, but basically it's described as rewiring the brain to make someone unable to be coherent and functional, which really just means turning them into a vegetable, quote unquote. The only person that we know with this ability is Adrian.
You know what I have to ask you now, right?
No.
No. If you could pick one of these powers, what would you pick?
Oh. Obviously, I'm not a pregog, so that's out.
Oh my God. Yep. You would make a terrible precog. Gonna be a no.
It seems pretty badass to be able to be an insider, honestly. You can just make people do whatever.
Oh my God. I didn't think you would pick that. I thought you were too nice to take people's autonomy away. Yep.
Hey,
Lori is here. It's Lori,
just
not
remember,
Lorraine.
yeah, I was about to be like, just remember, this is not Lorraine. This is Lori today. I was going to say either that, though. Okay, in fairness, the other one that I was thinking about was being a healer. Just because I feel like it'd be really handy and nice to be able to
That's
just
dope as hell.
heal everything and
Yeah.
fun.
My top two were healing and my reading because I'm nosy as fuck. I'm being everybody's business. I'll be like, what you thinking about?
Tell me what you're thinking. Actually, don't, because I'm going to figure it out. All right, so next we thought we'd talk a little bit about the primes. So primes are normies, and they possess 0 special abilities. Primes are taught. I am a normie, so
Ditto.
womp womp. They are taught how to defend against the modified by learning to shield their minds. However, the lessons are pretty basic, and they're generally insufficient unless someone has been specifically trained within the command. It's pretty clear through Ren's thoughts and reactions/commentary from other prime characters that the basis of the prime's hatred toward the modified stems from fear and a lack of understanding about their abilities. This, of course, doesn't justify the extreme prejudice and injustices inflicted upon them, but it helps to see where the prime headspace and attitude comes from.
Yeah, I think the lack of understanding seems to play a pretty big role in the fear. When Ren is in training, there are many, many conversations with the recruits share these extreme rumors that they've heard that are very outlandish about the modified. And some of these recruits, their parents literally work in the government, and even they're spewing this ridiculous nonsense that just doesn't even seem possible, even in a world where there are people that have telepathy, right? And it's repeated by a few different characters throughout the book that there's still so much they don't understand or know about being modified. And so I think a lot of it stems from the fear of the unknown. That plus the whole President Severin thing and his penchant for inciting people to do his bidding makes it understandable why people feel badly about the modified. I do see where they're coming from.
I mean, it really just reminds us of like the whole conversations in fantasy books where there's magic wielders and normal people, regular humans kind of fear the magic wielders because they're defenseless against them and all that. So that's kind of what it feels like with the modified as well. All right, so our last, I guess, world building related topics is to touch on a couple of the other groups or parties that we've seen talked about. First off, we had the faithful. This is a group of people who subscribe to old era beliefs. There was a quote that said, maybe the faithful have the right idea after all with those old era beliefs. At least back then, there'd been some semblance of privacy, of freedom. You could live a life far from civilization if you chose. A harder life, certainly, but that's the thing about freedom, isn't it? There's always a price to pay for it. The faithful are free to live in the shadows, to decamp at a moment's notice and find another home on the fringes, to fend off starvation and be hunted by the command. The faithful are an intriguing group to me because they seem pretty harmless in my opinion, but I guess if they subscribe to the ideas that the general hates and they also receive stolen medical supplies and all that, I guess that would piss off the company enough to be tracked down by them rather than be left alone. I don't necessarily know yet if I see them becoming a major threat, mostly because it seems like they just want to keep to themselves. And then also just kind of based on the context, it seems like they tend to reside near the Black Lands. Is that how you interpreted that as well?
Yeah, it definitely seems that they stick closer to a more abandoned or remote areas, and they're also nomadic, likely because they're hunted by the company. And so I think they try to avoid populated areas because it makes them an easy target. So I'm with you. They're mentioned enough that I definitely feel like they're going to come and play in some way. The thing is, the way they've been presented now, their ultimate purpose is literally to exist and be left alone, right? They don't want to conform to the general's version of society, but that doesn't really make them bad. I think it makes them more just a nuisance. It does seem like they do steal resources from the company, quote unquote, like medicine, for example, the whole Jasperine thing. I mean, I'm not faulting them for that, right? They need medical supplies, but that's the criminal element there. And that's not really the same thing. They don't, not a bunch of little rows running around. You know what I mean? Little generals. I love when they call him the little general. It's so demeaning.
It's condescending as fuck.
I love it.
He is.
He is. He's a Napoleon complex so bad. I just know he's a short king. I know he is.
He's not a short king. He can't be a king with that attitude. He can be a short
douchebag.
Yeah.
He can be a short quat.
Yeah, short quat.
Be a quat.
I hate that word so
I
much,
know.
but
Oh my God, this
in this
slang
context,
in this book.
not as funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
I should add that to the dislikes. There's like a lot of weird slang in this book that I just didn't vibe with, but anyways.
Keen.
Okay. The other special interest group to mention is Jasper Reed. We learn that Reed is a criminal, and specifically, he is a smuggler with fingers in every criminal pie in the point. The bulk of his operation involves drug running, used to bring opiates in from TRFA, but we crushed that avenue last year, yet the drugs keep flowing. We suspect they've set up a lab somewhere in the wards. He also trades with the faithful, and this includes anything from supplies, favors, escape routes, hiding places, and medical supplies stolen from the company. I am also somewhat on the fence about whether he will become a larger part of the plot, unless it turns out that Reed is also involved with creating new biotoxins or something like that. But I could see issues with him being some sort of mission or I guess like a cause for action in the other books if he gets linked with a bigger yet to be revealed situation in connection to the modified or biotoxins or something that threatens the company at large.
See, at first, I thought I had like this brilliant idea about Jasper Reed. After my first read, I'm like, oh my God, what if Jasper Reed is actually her father? Like her dad's still living and he was jaded because the company screwed him instead of the uprising. And then on the reread, Ren sees a picture of Jasper Reed and he's described as hot, first of all, and then in his early 20s. And I was like, dang it, he's going to be too young to be her father. But then I was like, what if he's your brother? Which there's absolutely no evidence to support that whatsoever. I was just grasping for straws because I wanted to be right about something really random. I did
trying to make fetch happen.
I was trying to make fetch happen, okay? I was trying to be innovative.
Too hard. That theory was too far
fetched. It was too far fetched. One of my dreams, okay, you know those TikTok videos where like someone says something and then like 2 years later, they're like, remember when I said this and you all talked a bunch of shit to me? And they splice it together and they're like, look who was right, motherfucker. That's my dream, okay?
I am now.
I want to be right about something that upset people so I can be like, you look really dumb right now and I look really great.
You look so dumb.
That's my dream. So,
okay.
But in terms of the young Jasper Reed, who's almost certainly not Ren's father, I do feel like he's going to come up in the next book. He's mentioned enough. It's part of one of their missions to go and track down the supply chains. I think it'll most likely start out as a pursuit of him because he's going to possess some like important contraband or knowledge about the company and or the uprising. And it's going to be like a little race who can get to him first. Because it kind of seems like he operates as an independent entity, right? If a man doesn't like him and the uprising is like, oh God, I want to launch him on a rocket into space. And so I kind of like that. I like that he's a rogue agent and he's really all about that money. You know, he's chasing that paper and I'm here for that. Chasing them credit.
All right. So we've gotten to our extra juicy part of the conversation, and this is our discussion of the major twists. So first and foremost, we have the Cross is Wolf reveal. I gotta be honest, I did not have this on my radar until Addison was like, I bet Cross is Rolf. And I was like, where'd you get that from? But in retrospect, I guess it makes total sense. I think for like the first third, I figured Wolf was going to be revealed at some point, but I thought he'd be part of the uprising. Or when we initially met Kane, I thought it might be him because I was like, oh, damn, they have such great chemistry. I wonder if Wolf is Kane. My other thought was that perhaps it would turn into some sort of love triangle with Ren developing feelings for Cross, but then also meeting Wolf in real life and then needing to pick one. None of those ended up being the case. So, since you did pick up on this early, what lines or details do you remember noting that made you think Wolf was Cross?
Oh, my brilliance, obviously. Nothing else. Before I answer that question, I will say, I think leading up to the actual reveal, I think there is little Easter eggs that are supposed to make you think that Kane is Wolf. Because remember when they're on a plane and they're talking about flying and Kane is like, oh, we always went to Heath End. And he's talking about the ocean and everything like that. And that's a very common thing with Wolf. He's always describing the ocean. And so on a second read, I'm like, oh, it kind of feels like it's supposed to be Kane, right? I think that's intentional. But I am so proud of myself because I called this in like chapter 3, literally chapter 3. I think a little bit it's just guesswork based on the pattern of other books I've read. But I also think it was a combination of her meeting Cross at the inn and not knowing who he was until several chapters chapters later, he's just like the hot, mysterious stranger. After that, I was like, okay, yep, the hot stranger is going to be her man. That's going to be the guy that she ends up with. And then we get introduced to Wolf very shortly after that. And the moment that she said they agreed to never share each other's real names and that your telepathic voice sounds different from your spoken voice, that's what really snapped into place for me. I'm like, oh, okay.
Interesting.
However, I will admit I did not anticipate Cross being the general's son. I did not see that coming. I will say I did waver just a bit when she got hot and heavy with Kane because I thought she was going to fall for Cross and then at the end realize Kane was Wolf. And then we'd have like a real difficult love triangle because she has this physical, charismatic, magnetic attraction to Cross. But Wolf is her childhood friend. And I think that actually would have made the love triangle more interesting and better.
Oh, see, I think the love triangle would have been fantastic. I would have loved to see it.
Me too. Normally, I'm not a fan, but I actually really would have liked it. I actually think there's some potential for it in the next book.
You think
which
so?
We'll talk about. I do. Yeah, we'll talk about it when we talk about the Grace and Blake.
Interesting. Now, as far as Cross goes, we also learned that he is modified, obviously, but he states he doesn't have any other abilities. However, I did briefly wonder if he might be an empath because Ro comments on how Travis is practical and calculated and doesn't really, quote, rely on emotion like Cross. I feel like there's several references to Cross being this emotional person. I just kind of lightly wondered if that may be some foreshadowing for Cross actually developing some more specialized modified abilities later on.
I think that's a really good call out because honestly, I didn't even think about it. And I feel like it's a little unclear on like if/how/when you can develop other abilities. Most of the abilities start to show up when around they're 12, but it seems like the door is open for literally developing them at any point in time. So
yeah,
I will add to your point that he seems very affected by his mother's condition. Of course, that could just be because it's his mom and he loves her, but it could be more that he actually feels her pain. So I think there's good evidence to support that.
We will see. Another twisty, crazy thing was Bettina's death and the reveal that she was an empath. This also really surprised me, actually. It makes total sense there would be more modified people working for the Uprising who would try and infiltrate Silverblock and Silver Elite specifically, considering that we learned pretty early on that the Uprising has members all throughout command in various capacities. I am kind of surprised, though, that they send in modified who can't hide their silver veins for something as specific as Silverblock training, because I feel like that's such an easy tell that it seems like almost too risky. On the other hand, I guess it's a necessary risk if it means that they can get higher security clearance access. In retrospect, though, her asking questions during training about empath abilities was definitely foreshadowing for her being modified herself. But this is, again, one of those weird things where I feel like the foreshadowing is given in a way that makes you think it's not somebody or like you don't suspect them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to explain this. Because the only time where I was like, oh, something is up was quite literally right before when that one guy dies. And I do remember noting that she pulled down her sleeves and I was like, that's kind of weird. But then pretty soon after that, it gets revealed, right? But prior to that, I was like, what?
No, I agree it didn't even occur to me to suspect other people in the training program. But when you think about it, most of the gifts are pretty easy to control. You can control your telepathy. You can just do it when no one's around or not do it at all. Whereas inciting and empaths are the only ones that seem like sometimes they can be triggered by outside events or strong emotions. And that's why Adrian even says to Ren, like, she told the Uprising not to send an empath for this very reason, right? So once that conversation happened, now I'm like kind of suspicious of everybody. I'm like, everybody's modified. The Bettina thing, I was completely shocked. I did not clock that until literally the moment the bullet left the gun and Bettina was dead. It was actually exciting for me from a reading perspective because really did not see it coming at all. The whole time, the way the scene's written, you think Ro is talking about Ren and Ren's panicking and you're like, oh my God, because you know Ren's not going to die, right? So you're like, she's going to have to kill Anson and Ro. And how is she going to hide this from Bettina? And then bam, Bettima's gone. And you're like, and so on the second read, I did clock this. And I see you're better than I am because I didn't even notice it the first time. But it's described, Bettina starts to back away, hugging her arms to her chest and shaking as if she just entered a freezer. She pulls her sleeves down as far as they'll go and hugs herself tighter. She's in shock. And on a reread, you're like, oh, because them veins were roiling.
Yes.
She pulls the sleeves to hide her veins. And she's in shock because she has literally just felt Glenn dying, right? And then she like throws up and stuff. And so it seems such a normal reaction. You're just like, cannot believe you're seeing this poor person with a horrible wound, right? And then Ro comes and you're just like, oh shit. So yeah, that was an exciting twist, honestly. I did not anticipate it in the slightest.
Same. I will say Batima's death was especially tragic to me, especially because she dies via vigilante justice from frickin' Ro, that little rat weasel. I suppose that it's true that her death was inevitable if she was ever discovered because she can't hide being modified like Ren can, but still, she never got a trial. She was just killed in cold blood on a rooftop, and that really sucked.
I totally agree. I think being killed by Ro is even worse because he's a sadistic little quad.
Exactly. Yes.
I hate saying that phrase so much.
But for him, it makes
But for
sense.
him, if I can say it. But it does make her death seem more tragic because it's very gruesome. He and Anson enjoying people's pain. They're just evil. They're evil through and through, right? The general's bad, but I don't think he's evil in that way. You know what I mean? You think the general enjoys people suffering?
Well, he didn't have a problem with Ro. Cross was trying to get Ro kicked out, and the general's like, no, leave him in there. And the general's entire regime is centered on
but see, I mean, I don't want to go like too far down this rabbit hole. You can be in charge, but actually doing the dirty work is very different. Ordering it, you're distanced from it, you're desensitized to it. And so I actually think it's easier to order an atrocity than it is to commit the atrocity.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Maybe the general is a bad example, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes, but I still feel like the general's pretty bad.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying he's good. I'm just saying he may not be like, you know what, it doesn't matter.
Quite as psychotic as Ro is.
Yes.
So, like, uncontrolled.
Ro is a psychopath. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next big twist, the fact that Kane was still alive and that he's actually Grayson Blake. I was very excited about this twist because Kane is my favorite character. I was about to be real disappointed if he didn't end up making it on to book 2. While I hadn't pieced together that Kane was Grayson Blake, I did definitely feel like he was either part of the uprising, modified, or both. I just felt like he was a very empathetic character who didn't seem so outwardly opposed to the modified in the same way other characters training for Silverblock were. So that was something that like put him on my radar. I do also remember flagging the conversation when they were flying to the desert for sniper exercises in chapter 26. Kane comments flying's overrated and that he's flown a handful of times. And then, of course, now knowing that he's Grayson Blake, that was definitely some pretty hard foreshadowing for that reveal. There were also details about how he carefully studied all the maps and continued research on his comm and stuff like that. That was pretty interesting. And I do remember kind of being like, Mostly, I just noted that Kane's reactions to a lot of things that happened, or like in relation to the modified, was just very different from how a lot of the other people were reacting. But honestly, didn't clock that he was going to be Grayson Blake, though. I was like,
not
wow.
even once. Yeah. When I tell y'all I was screaming about this one, I mean it. Okay. I was on the floor when this was revealed. I was hyperventilating. I'm like, what? Yes.
He's alive.
The absolute best thing about doing this podcast, besides spending so much time with Lorraine, is making book besties that we actually get to talk to on a regular basis about books. And so we've had a very active chat going with Megan. Shout out to Megan. We love you. But both she and Lorraine kept saying, there was something going on with Kane. They just kept saying that. And I was like, yeah, I don't think so. Like, yeah, I just didn't see it at all. Okay. And then it was so funny because Lorraine had finished the book before me and we were getting ready to record an Empire Storms episode. And we were talking about it before we started. And I was actually complaining to her about how the book was like missing this emotional connection for me. And I specifically talked about Kane's death. And so for like 7 minutes straight, I remember telling Lorraine that the author should have like hit us emotionally with his death. And he should have died in Ren's arm. And he could have said something like, I'll see you later, cowgirl, or something like that. And Lorraine was like, oh yeah, totally. Like that totally makes sense. And then I finished the book like that night. And I was like, Lorraine, oh my God. I am very proud of her for for holding it together during that whole conversation because she kept a straight face and she's like, yeah, you're totally right. Because I was heated, actually. I was really mad about Kane's
a lot
death.
of strong opinions about
I
that.
did. I think about that conversation often. So, yeah. Whoops. But I love the twist. I thought it was chef's kiss. I like the quote that you pointed out in chapter 26 when they're on the op and they're on the plane. And Ren's like, I've never been on a plane. And Kane's just so casual. He's like, yeah, flying's overrated. You're not missing much. And it's just so funny knowing that he's this super hotshot pilot. Like, not only does he fly a lot, but like, he is
He's
the
like
premier pilot. He's like,
yeah.
overrated. You know, I love that.
Okay, moving on to the next twist. Liddy's betrayal.
Boo.
That little quat.
It's so funny. Every time you say it, it's funny.
This was another event that really shocked me. I truly believed Liddy would end up being a sympathizer. Maybe not for everyone, but at least for Ren, because, you know, her comments about not being sure Fatima was modified and generally feeling bad about it. I don't know, she just seemed like she didn't hate the modified to the same extent that other silver block training members seem to be. However, upon reading the book again, Liddy's character personality was also someone who is very rule-oriented, and I guess when I think about it, I doubt she was willing to risk being kicked out of silver block if there was a chance her closeness with Ren could get her kicked out. So I guess it kind of makes sense that she ratted Ren out, but I hate her for that. Liddy is also a little rat weasel.
Yeah. I, once again, did not see this coming either. I thought for sure Ivy was going to narc. It was a good twist, but I was sad because I really like Liddy and the friendship she and Ren developed because I feel like Liddy truly does care for Ren. She barely knows her and she's like, I'm going to help you study because like I believe in you and like we're going to be in this together. And Ren softened so much to her. And so I really did think Liddy would at least give her 24 hours to explain. And then, you know, but she ran straight to her. And of all people to tell freaking Ro too, which is especially fucked up when you think about it because Liddy knows how Ro handled Fatima. He shot her in the head in cold blood.
Right.
So what does she think Ro's going to do? He's going to kill her. The betrayal cuts a little deeper when you think about it from that perspective. I think ultimately Liddy is a product of the world she was brought up in and is a byproduct of what she's been told to believe her whole life, which is that she should fear mods. And so even though they do have that close relationship, I do also think Liddy feels betrayed. I wonder if it would have been different if Ren would have confided in her earlier, but of course then they wouldn't have been as close. So I don't know. It seems like Liddy was always going to narc. So I wonder if there's going to be a redemption arc for her, actually, or if she's just going to move into our quat list.
We'll see. I don't know if I can forgive her for this, though, because
I could, because I'm a softie. I want them to be best friends forever.
Lori is not.
Lorraine's not here today. Lori is.
So the next big thing that happened was Adrian's powers. What Adrian can do is absolutely terrifying, and the fact that she can just rewire minds is wild, but obviously very helpful to the uprising, of course. I could also see it being like kind of a double-edged sword because when someone has a super unique power like that, it also becomes something that easily identifies them. So I'm kind of wondering if we'll get out that Adrian has this ability and then it'll end up creating like a trail. They'll be able to find all the fragmented people or like the people that have been frazzle-dazzled, and then they'll be like, oh, it was Adrian. She was here. You know what I mean?
No, you didn't with the frazzle-dazzle.
I did, and this is not the first time I will say that. I included it several more times in this outline.
So we're coming out of this episode with plot bombed and frazzle-dazzled.
Yes.
I love this twist in the plot because it opened the door to so many questions. Did the uprising have anything to do with Cross's mom? What about all the modified that Ren found whose minds were fractured? Who else has this power? What are its limitations? What are the moral implications of Adrian's actions against the general? And I'm excited to explore that in the next books.
Our next section, we figured we'd do a little bit of major character analysis. So, first question for this section, who is your favorite character?
You already know, baby.
Yeah, as expected, mine was hands down Kane. A, he's hot. B, he's funny. And C, he turned out to be the Grayson Blake and pulled off a crazy bomber jet heist while faking his death. And then we learned that he's been secretly working with the uprising the whole time without being suspected at all. Chef's kiss. I just loved in general that he was a very flirty character, but he was also respectful and also very empathetic to Ren and the deaths of other characters like Batima. So overall, great character.
Retweet to everything you said. I will only add that, being hot is great and all, but being funny and hot, look out. Okay, that's a lethal combination for me. I love his swag, his arrogance. He's so charismatic. And then you find out he's a covert operative, extremely smart, and a pilot. Move out of the way, Crossthreading. You're blocking my view of Kane. Okay. In addition to Kane, I also actually really liked Uncle Jim / Julian Ash. I know he dies very early on in the book, but we get a lot of memories of him through Ren's perspective. To be totally honest, I think part of why I like him so much is because I can't unsee him as Pedro Pascal, and I fucking love Pedro Pascal. I think it's because his character reminds me a lot of Pedro's character from The Last of Us. That gritty, protective father figure. And so I think that may be part of why I like Julian Ash so much.
That is canon now. Pedro Pascal is Jim. Yes.
Yeah.
So next we were going to talk a little bit about Ren and her decisions. I'm going to keep it in check because, to be honest, Ren as an FMC wasn't it for me. I thought a lot of what she did was honestly just thoughtless and dumb rather than just being about recklessness. She was repeatedly told by Cross that she was going to go back home, and she was also informed by Tana that the uprising wouldn't be rescuing her, and yet rather than choosing to work with that and making other decisions, she immediately turns around and, at least from the way that I was reading things, I kind of felt like she whined about stuff or would be like, I have to get out, I can't do this. So that was kind of frustrating to me because I felt like she was supposed to be this badass character, but the thing that really tipped me over the edge, though, was when she had Ellis heal her scar, because I was like, why? Especially after she had finally committed to training in Silver Elite. She was recruited for the uprising. I was like, okay, we're gonna be done with the dumb stuff. And then she turned around and did that.
Yeah. I've seen a fair amount of complaints about her wishy-washy attitude. I'm mostly okay with her character. As I mentioned earlier, the whole she's a 20-year-old and she's had a traumatizing past and all that. It gives me more leeway for her. And I think, living in a society that wants you dead is hard, right? Her entire world has been uprooted. And so I think it's normal to have this internal struggle of like, do I fight it? Do I just accept it? However, I do agree that when she had Ellis heal her blood mark, that took me out. Jim, Pedro Pascal, fucking died to protect you. The one thing he told you to never do was show that blood mark or tell anyone that you were an insider. And what did she do? She ran right into Cross's bedroom and was like, but Daddy, I love him. And she eliminated the only layer of protection she had. And it was funny because even Cross was like, why did you do that? You're so fucking stupid. And then she gets mad at him and she's like, you fucking asshole. I did it because I wanted to prove my love for you. Wah. You know what? I'm getting annoyed just thinking about it. That was the thing that turned me off. Everything else, I'm like, yeah, okay, I can roll with it or justify it. But that was the one thing I'm like, girl, you are so dumb. And then poor Cross, she kills Jade. Fucking Liddy sees her blood mark. Then Ivy. Poor Cross is like, goddamn, girl, how many more problems are you going to make?
See, this is what I'm saying. She created all of these problems. And then instead of figuring out how to solve them herself, I just felt like her response all the time was like, I need to go complain to someone, or I need someone to get me out, or I need someone to come help me. And I was like,
that's true.
Didn't. If you're going to be reckless, then at least own up to it and be like, okay, how the fuck do I fix this? And so that was kind of my issue with a lot of her behavior. But aside from that stuff, I will say that I appreciate that she has boundaries and rules around use of her abilities. For example, when she first reads Liddy's mind during orientation, she thinks this is why I'm so loath to do this. Mind reading is the greatest invasion of privacy that exists, and everyone, even primes, deserve their privacy. Your mind is the one place where you should feel completely and unequivocally safe. People like me rob you of that refuge, and each time I read an unsuspecting mind, I hate myself a little bit more. Also, despite her recklessness, she does help others as much as possible. For example, rescuing the boy from the white coyote, despite drawing attention to herself, giving Para her bed the first night in the dorms, rescuing Tanner from Anson. And obviously she feels guilt and remorse for accidentally killing Bryce, even though Bryce was a staple prime who was very biased against the modified.
I do agree that at her core, I think Ren is a very good person with a good heart. And I appreciate the author using Ren as a device to show the moral gray area of the way their society is constructed. Ren is really a participant in both sides of the war, despite her being modified. When she thinks about the command and the uprising, oftentimes she has thoughts like, not all primes are bad people. There are good ones too, just like there are good mods and bad mods. And I think she's supposed to represent this ideology that everyone should be treated not on the basis of being prime or mod, but the kind of person they are. And I think that's going to continue as she gets more to the uprising and sees that maybe they're not all they're cracked up to be, just like the command.
Next, we, of course, will talk about Cross. I liked Cross, and I felt like he was a pretty morally good person even before learning he was Wolf. The fact that he tries to send people to labor camps rather than execute them is a good sign. But of course, the fact that he is also secretly modified obviously played a huge role in his more compassionate attitude and approach. Aside from that, though, I wouldn't say he was anything particularly special in terms of an MMC. Yes, he is hot and has a gruff and tough attitude, but I didn't feel like, we've got like a Zaddy Ryerson on our hands or anything like that. But he was a good character. So
yeah, he's fine, literally, and like he's fine. That's great. But I actually like Wolf much more than I like Cross, which is kind of funny because they're meant to be the same person. But when Ren is talking to Wolf, I liked him better. Cross, to me, is actually a little bland. He's a little generic for whatever reason. On the surface, he is very reminiscent of the main male character from the Divergent series, but I feel like his character is missing a dimension that makes me feel invested in him. And so maybe we'll get more development from him in the next book. I actually wouldn't be surprised if she does some POVs from Cross's perspective, now that the secret that he is Wolf has been revealed, because she couldn't do that in this book because you would know he's Wolf, right? So I think that would probably be good for my investment in Cross's character.
I would like that.
Me
I
too.
love a good multi-POV. So
me too. I really do.
I also do worry for Cross given the end of the book. I guess he'll be able to cover all the events of the Jubilee up to some extent, but it was pretty obvious that he and Ren had a thing. So I anticipate he's going to field a lot of questions around that now that Ren is gone, and so is Xavier. Also, especially since there were so many people that infiltrated Silver Block, and 2 Silver Elite members turned out to be working with the Uprising, aka Ren and Kane. Considering being picked for Silver Elite wasn't just about training performance, it especially implicates him as being complicit since his judgment was a big part of who was picked for that subunit.
I didn't even think about how Cross is going to handle it when he gets back, so I'm glad you brought it up. But as you were saying it, I feel like the pieces clicked into place. I don't know what his excuse is going to be for being gone. Maybe he's going to, okay, I figured it out. So he's going to go back and they're going to be like, where the fuck is Ren? And he's going to be like, she and Xavier left together because Xavier's also modified. He's working for the Uprising, so he broke her out. I was chasing them to try and stop them, but they got into the Blacklands and I couldn't follow them in there. I think that's going to be his cover story and how he's going to get out of it.
Ooh, and so now Xavier can't come back either.
Well, yeah, Xavier's gone. He knew that when he left that he wasn't going to be able to come back. So I do worry for Cross, though, because the general, is frazzle-dazzled. And I don't think he's going to come back from that. And so Travis does not seem like he'd be as forgiving of Cross for his actions in the way that his father would have. So I do wonder about that. Worry about it a little bit.
With.
Oh, yeah, because Ro's going to tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how are you going to get out of that?
A lot of carefully constructed lies.
So my last little note for Cross, he seems to be someone who's kind of in the middle. He's not fully against his father's way of doing things, but just seems to kind of accept that not a lot can necessarily be done about it. It seems like he'd kind of rather stay alive or keep people alive rather than risk the chaos of disorder should the company fall. Plus, I think he views himself as the balance to the General, Travis, and Ro, since they all strongly subscribe to hating the modified and enforcing harsh punishments. That's why he decided to stay back at the end of the book as well. And there was a quote from him I remember sticking out, and it was when he said, "I believe that humanity is wired for destruction no matter the environment. Old era, new era, aberrant on top, prime on top. We will always find a way to destroy ourselves. We're a doomed species." He also tells Ren, I bristle at that, the opportunity to be forced into a life I never wanted. And then he says, sometimes we just have to accept our fate, Dove. Trying to fight against it only leads to headaches. So, I don't know. I kind of understand. I mean, he grew up being secretly modified, but as the general's son, there are things that are expected of him. So I would imagine that's a very tough place to be in. Next, we, of course, would love to talk about Kane. As you guys already know, Kane was my favorite character. I love his flirty nature and the twist about who he really was. But I also feel like Kane is definitely going to continue being a prominent character now that we know he's been working with the Uprising. I'm kind of on the fence about whether he's aberrant. I could really go either way on that. If he is aberrant, I think he is probably more like Ren, but until we get more information about him, I'm leaning toward him not being modified at this time. It's pretty clear he is highly skilled, since not only was he the infamous pilot for the Uprising, but he also, of course, made it through to Silver Elite, proving he is good at being undercover. So I'm very excited to see what is in store for his character in the next book.
Yes, that's actually one thing I wanted to ask you about, is if you thought he was modified, and if so, what his gifts were. I'm sure that there are primes working with the Uprising, but I would be surprised, given his high rank and notoriety in the Uprising, if he didn't have any abilities. I think that he does, and here's why. I don't think that Kane could have infiltrated Silverblock and pulled off the heist of faking his death and stealing the jet without being able to communicate telepathically. He would have had needed to communicate and coordinate pretty regularly with the Uprising to pull that off, and I highly doubt he was regularly meeting with them in person at the base, because that just would have been way too risky. And using comms would have also been too risky, because they're constantly monitored. And I know it's mentioned that the Uprising has like these special offline comms, but even if he had one of those, someone could have found it and then they would have immediately known that he was a spy. Given all of that context, and then when you kind of think it through, I feel like it's most likely that he at least has telepathy. As far as anything else, I don't know.
That would be really interesting. I hope he is aberrant, just because I feel like that would be fun. But
I love the idea of him and Ren having a telepathic connection, and just, I want Ren and Kane to be together so bad. That's really going to shine through in this episode.
Speaking of which, we're about to hit on your little note about that.
Okay, perfect.
I am also anticipating he will probably work more closely with Ren now that they are at the Uprising base together. And just given all their training together in the Silver Elite program, they both have insider knowledge about that, which I'm sure makes them particularly useful for the Uprising.
I would bet solid money on an upcoming love triangle between Kane and Ren and Cross. And here's why. At the end of the book, we know that Ren is likely going to spend a fair amount of the next book alone with Kane, because Cross goes back to Sanctum Point. He's going to be there for at least a little while before they end up reconnecting, because Ren can't go back to Sanctum Point, obviously. Plus, in this book, Ren and Kane had that really steamy makeout session. There's some obvious flirting and chemistry. I think that Ren had at least a little crush on Kane. And you can probably tell I'm Team Kane. Okay, I want her to be with him. Unfortunately, I don't think she'll end up with him because of the whole wolf is Cross thing, and they've loved each other from a distance for years kind of thing. It seems like it'd be pretty hard for Kane to overcome that. But I do think that that's going to be a plot point of the next book.
See, I feel like given how things played out, I actually don't feel like they're going to get a love triangle, because, I mean, she denied Kane so heavily. Like, clearly, yes, like, I was Team Kane and I want something to happen to them, and I was disappointed that nothing did. But she denied him at every turn and was very solidly like, I love Cross. Oh my God, Cross is wolf.
Well, not in the beginning, though. But see, now they're going to spend all this time together.
I don't know. I feel like the romance part of the book is like a little too set. If there was going to be a love triangle, I feel like it would have been in this first book.
That's fair.
But now that it's established, Ren and Cross are like in love with each other, yada yada, I feel like it'd be weird to then introduce Kane into the mix. I don't know. We'll see. It might be a fun twist.
Only one way to find out. We're going to track Dani Francis down and ask her, or wait for the next book.
Moving on to some outstanding questions on the world building, characters, or just the modified in general.
Before we jump into the really juicy theorizing, I do have a complaint about the plot of this book that I need to address so I can just get it off my chest. The entire plot of the book is ticked off because Ren saved that little boy from the White Coyote and made that really impressive shot with her rifle. And I'm confused why making an impressive shot made them so suspicious of her. She literally has a government-issued gun Ren, it's reasonable to assume she's practiced a lot and used it regularly. I think they have to pass some kind of test to even get a license for it. It's used in her profession, which is ranching, right? So I don't really feel like I got the connection of why such an impressive shot made them suspect anything. I get the whole don't draw attention to yourself thing, but I feel like there's this disconnect between that event and them being like, we're going to show up and we know it's Julian Ash. It bothered me.
Yeah, I will agree something about that was a little bit weird. My understanding of it is that, yes, Ren had to train, but even when she passed her tests, she didn't excel on those tests to get the license in the first place. I remember she did well enough, but it was not outstanding by any means. And then I think with the coyote thing, I know it was a crazy shot. It was 100 yards away, and yet she hit the coyote directly. Well, actually, though, we do know Wardsey was under watch for quite a while. That's why Moss was there in the first place.
Yeah, that's fair.
In the very beginning. So maybe they
were
all
those things combined.
Suspicious, of things going on in the first place. And then Ren was just the little cookie on top, or the little cherry on top, where they were
the little cookie on top.
Where they're okay, we got to check them out,
That's fair. It's still a bit of a reach for me, but I'll go with that.
All right. So one of the first topics is TRFA, of course. So in chapter 19, Ro had said, the shithole, that whole continent, they claim we've lost God, and that's why we don't belong in their holy presence. But that sounds mighty convenient. Wouldn't surprise me if they were cooking up a new toxin in some lab down there, or working on the existing toxin. Because of that one specifically, and just the general tension between TRFA and the continent, I do anticipate TRFA will continue to become a problem later because of their attitude toward the modified as well, as the implication that the biotoxin could still exist over there. They seem very well armed, and they have their own governing system that seems kind of more religiously oriented. So they seem kind of primed for something big to happen as far as a conflict goes. There was also one detail about Silverblock having an outpost at the Southport where the trade ships with Tierra Fe dock, and Ren thinks I'd take that assignment in a heartbeat. Uncle Jim told me my mother's ancestors were from Tierra Fe before it was ever called Tierra Fe. I also did wonder if Ren will go there to find more about her parents or family history or something like that.
Or hear me out. Maybe her parents are still alive and they've been hiding out in Tierra Fe.
Oh, they never died in the first place.
We'll talk about this more when we get there, but I think her father's still alive. Not her mother, but her father.
Okay, interesting.
Whether that's true or not, who knows, right? But I do agree that TRFA is definitely going to play a larger role in the world, and probably the next book specifically. The comment about them working on some new toxins just so random for it not to be foreshadowing and have a larger implication for the plot down the road, especially coming from Ro.
So in connection to TRFA, we of course also want to discuss whether the biotoxin was fully eradicated. I don't believe it's fully eradicated, specifically because of Ro's weird comment when they asked their comm about whether the toxin was gone, and Ro says, what does that prove? That the voice on your comm is asserting it to be true. Guaranteed, there's still some of that shit floating around. I bet they're colluding with the Aberrant, smuggling supplies to their secret base. I'm sure this will become a problem for them later on, and in this case, Ro believes they could still have the biotoxin or even be creating their own toxin. I guess I could see a couple things happening. Maybe they use the biotoxin on themselves to become modified, or they unleash a new toxin in the world against the modified or whoever opposes them or something like that.
I think those are all really good possibilities. I read it like either they're going to cure the aberrant of their genetic modification so everyone will be prime, or being the total opposite. Everyone's going to be modified. Everyone's going to be special and get special abilities. And so I think I could actually see it going in either extreme.
So next we want to talk about the uprising. What do we think is going to happen there now that Ren is in their main camp? We do learn that the uprising doesn't aim to kill large numbers of people. They mainly want to root out Reden's ideology and allow the modified to be free while restoring a new mindset that accepts the modified. And there was a quote that said, a dead general doesn't dismantle the system. If you want to enact change, you need to do more than just take out the leader. You need to deprogram the minds, root out the ideology. This was, I think, from Adrian, I believe, right? Then Ren thinks, I wonder if she recognizes the irony, if she realizes she's repeating the same things General Redden says during his broadcasts. Ideas are weeds, don't let them spread. Although I suppose Adrian's take has a slight variation. She doesn't want to simply pull the weeds, she wants to plant something new in their place. I suppose I can admire that. Now that General Redden has been frazzle-dazzled, I am assuming that will definitely have an impact, but I don't think it will do much right now because Travis will just take over instead. Regardless, I am assuming the next book will include more of the perspective from the uprising, and we'll start to see more direct confrontations and fights between them and the company.
I still love frazzle-dazzle.
Frazzle-dazzle.
I am really interested in the governing structure of the uprising. Adrian seems like she's quite a high-ranking member, but when she tells Ren she's recommended her to become an official member, she mentions that she submitted it to get approved. So that implies to me there are at least a few people who are running the uprising, so I'm very interested in that. I also want to know a lot more about what their ultimate goals are and what their vision is for the world if they succeed and get to rule the continent, essentially. I have a feeling that what they want is not going to be all sunshines and rainbows. And it's more likely that they'll want something that was closer to what President Severn was. I feel like there's this tinge of revenge that has now been introduced with the uprising because what they did to the general was pretty fucked up. So
yeah,
I'm curious. I feel like Ren is not going to like what she discovers. I think she's sort of idealized the uprising, and I think she's fixing to find out ain't the case.
Yeah, that's kind of the sense that I get as well. And my next point here kind of segues into that. I definitely did flag when Jade Valance insinuated that the uprising side was not on the side of good. She told Ren, "You're fighting the wrong team. We're not the villains here. They are not my people, especially not the ones you're working for. They're unnatural. They're corrupting minds. If you surrender right now, I won't kill you. You would be a prisoner at first. But I think once I teach you everything there is to know, once I show you the possibilities, you'll understand why I'm working with the general." Pretty ominous, and this sets us up to see that perhaps the uprising is not as good as Ren and us as readers have been led to believe. And there are several thoughts from Ren and details that suggest that the conflict between the modified and primes has been messy and complicated on both sides. But it certainly is alarming that Jade Valance, as a modified person, is saying that the uprising is not good and has crossed lines by corrupting minds. But then again, on the other hand, it's also entirely possible that Jade has just been drinking the Kool-Aid for too long now, and so maybe she just fully believes that. So
probably a little bit of both, honestly. Yeah.
Similar to Jade's comment, this does kind of push us into what is going on with the fragmented and the modified. The discovery of the experimentation being done on the fractured / the modified was heartbreaking because obviously they don't deserve that and are barely lucid and aware of what's going on in the first place. I obviously have a lot of questions about this. Ren believes that the company is experimenting on the fragmented, but Jade's comments kind of make it seem like perhaps all the people in the hospital were corrupted minds, or it kind of like causes you to entertain that possibility. But now that they have been found, the company is perhaps experimenting on them, but we don't really know exactly what the company is actually doing at this time. One of my best guesses is that they're trying to create something that will either eradicate the modified mutation and cure it, or perhaps help fix a fragmented mind so that the general, for example, can help his wife go back to how she was before if it turns out that she was frazzle-dazzled.
It makes me laugh every time because it's like such a serious, horrible thing when you say frazzle-dazzled. It makes it sound fun. Oh my God, you're a bad influence, Lori. But retweet everything you said. I think those are the two main outstanding questions. Were they fractured intentionally or is it accidental? Ren does recall Jim telling her as a child that some minds just aren't strong enough for their gifts and that can cause someone's mind to fracture. I feel like that seems like an accurate part of the world building. I'm going to take that at face value. And then, of course, are the primes fracturing mods or is the uprising or both? What's going on there? The final question that I feel like is outstanding there is what was the command doing with those fractured individuals? Ren takes note of all the vials of blood, and I mentioned this earlier, but I think, again, it could go in either direction. They want to cure the mods or they want everyone to be mods so they can level the playing field. So that's what I'm going to be on the lookout for in the next book.
So this discussion of fragmented people, of course, leads us into the question of what is actually going on with Cross's mom. This was another very shocking reveal, but it totally gives some context as to why General Redden is so hell-bent on getting rid of the modified. We don't get confirmation on whether she is modified or if she got frazzle-dazzled. But since she was fine up until Cross turned 12, I feel more inclined to believe her mind was rewired either by Adrian or maybe someone else we haven't met yet that has that power. I know Ren and Cross believe that she's fragmented modified, but I don't know. I'm unsure at this time.
Yeah, that's a good point. Right now, I'm leaning towards the Uprising attacking the general through his family, and they were responsible for fracturing her mind. It aligns with why the general detests the modified so much. And honestly, if that's what really happened, do you blame the general? Because I surely don't. If someone literally destroyed the mind of the person I loved and made them a shell of themselves, I'd hate them too. Honestly, I think that's worse than just straight up killing people. Imagine spending years and years watching the person you love just become a husk. That's really fucked up. So I feel like that's going to play into the story.
I think so too. So the next topic of discussion is Ren's other potential powers. I could definitely see Ren developing other abilities. She has a blood mark, which indicates that she's extremely powerful. And in chapter 49, when Jade Balance finds her in the supply room before the Jubilee, she makes several notable comments about how remarkable it was that Ren managed to be cleared during their initial interrogation of her, how incredible her shield was. Obviously, she was able to withstand the 500-volt shock that the aberrant feel when their mind is infiltrated. Plus, we can't forget the fact that Ren incited 8 freaking soldiers during Jim's execution and got Jade to shoot herself by inciting her. Ren also has a thought where it said, Uncle Jim told me only the most powerful mods bear a mark and that he'd never known a marked mod to possess any less than 3 abilities. I have 4 myself that I know of anyway. Perhaps there's a 5th or 6th or 7th lying dormant inside me, waiting to be unleashed at the most inconvenient of times. That could very easily mean maybe we'll even see like something no mod has been discovered to have yet when she says like a 7th power. I am not sure she'll have everything, but I did wonder in particular if she will develop empath abilities. There were a few interesting lines about her feeling moods and things like that that stuck out to me. For example, during the building jump training exercise in chapter 28, Liddy is super nervous and Ren notes, I can practically feel the waves of anxiety radiating from her. And that seems like some pretty heavy-handed language. Also, in chapter 53, when Ren says bye to Cross, it says, my heart throbs as he presses a final kiss to my lips. Every ounce of emotion he feels from me ripples through my body.
Those are some really excellent callouts. I would not be surprised, given with your excellent evidence, if she ends up with more abilities. My question for you is, what purpose do you think it would serve the plot for her to develop all of the powers? She's already super powerful. She already has some of the rare abilities. How does it drive the plot for her to get more?
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess unless she develops something like totally new and unheard of, offers like a really special skill in some way.
That'd be cool,
I don't know, but that is a good question of like, how would that help her in the end? So I guess we'll see.
In relation to Ren's powers, I also wanted to ask you, why do you think Jim did not disclose to the Uprising that Ren could incite? We learned in a conversation between Ren and Adrian that the Uprising keeps records of all the mods and their gifts, and Adrian asks Ren if she noticed anyone inciting at Jim's execution, and Ren, of course, lies and says no, and it wasn't me, if that's what you're getting at. Adrian tells Ren they know it wasn't her because Jim didn't report that as one of her abilities, and then, of course, Ren gets emotional thinking about how Jim was always trying to protect her. And what does Ren do? She just throws it all away for Cross. Sorry, okay, I'll let that go now. But
oh, so freaking dumb.
But to my original question, why do you think that he did not report it?
I think it's because Jim realized that the Uprising would probably try to use her as a pawn. Like they would just use her as a weapon and a tool. Or alternatively, maybe he was afraid the Uprising could also view her as a threat. Maybe in the same way that primes see her as being that, they may decide this is a little too crazy. You're like too powerful. Especially if they can't control her, if they can't,
they feel threatened by her. Yeah, so they can't control her.
Or if they can't get her to side with her or something like that. It could also just play into this general idea that maybe the Uprising is not as well-intentioned as people have thought. And so Jim picked up on that and he was trying to keep Ren out of that as well. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair.
All right. So the next topic of discussion is Ren's parents being tin block traitors. I think that this reveal about her parents being considered traitors to the Uprising is interesting because it definitely helps contextualize why they wanted to get Ren out. They feared her being used as a weapon and a pawn, and I could see this causing problems for Ren should the uprising find out her true identity, because they may try and enact some sort of retroactive retribution against her for what her parents did. I also, of course, am left with questions about why they betrayed the uprising. From the context, it seems like her parents didn't approve of the uprising retaliating with mass destruction against the Command and Primes, even if many modified died because of Volterra Ridge.
Okay, yeah, I've got some major questions about her parents and some theories. I think it's highly likely that one or both of her parents are still alive. Most likely her father. We learned that her mother was executed for concealment, so it is possible she escaped or tricked them somehow, but that seems more unlikely. But her father was supposedly killed in the Volterra Ridge bombing, and to me it seems like it would be so easy for him to have faked his own death and then went into hiding anywhere with the uprising in the Blacklands, in Tierra Fe, especially because, he worked as part of the command, so he would have had knowledge and access to resources to smuggle himself out. So that is my big theory for Silverleaf. I think her dad's still alive. I know. I also do not actually think that they were truly traitors. I think it's highly likely that they realized the uprising was not all it's cracked up to be, and that they weren't much better than the command and tried to stop one or both sides from doing something that would ultimately hurt civilians. Yeah. Even if I'm way off base, I definitely feel like there's a lot more to their story that we are going to find out in the next book. I think we've just touched the tip of the iceberg with them. I have some evidence to support this, and here it is. Okay. In chapter 17, Ren recalls a conversation she had with Jim, and he tells Ren, "No, you, Ren, are reckless. And reckless is not the same as brave. Rushing headfirst into danger is not an act of courage. Your mother thought very hard about her every action. She went into every single situation with her eyes wide open. She knew exactly what she was doing and why." And that quote really solidified for me that Ren's parents' actions were very intentional and that there's more to their story.
I agree with that.
There's a lot of evidence to support that, I feel like.
So this brings us to our final part of the episode, and that is our spoiler-inclusive book rating and review. Starting with the rating, everything I said in the spoiler-free portion still stands, 3.5 overall. Plot was decent. Pacing felt a little bit slow to me, mostly in the sections where Ren was still denying whether or not she wanted to be in the training program. Like, when she was recruited and she accepted that she would try to get into Silver Elite, then I was like, okay, this is fine. I like this. But that little section in the middle where I was like, I feel like some of this could get cut and wouldn't have impacted anything. I also felt like the romance was a little bit cheesy. Some things were predictable in the plot, but there was also many things that really shocked me and I didn't see coming. Most of the reason I took up points was because I didn't really feel connected to the characters, and the writing, for whatever reason, just felt kind of hollowed. Outside of the modified and their powers, I wouldn't say that the story really stood out in a super prominent way, but with all that being said, it was still entertaining enough, and because I found myself wanting to read and find out what happens, then I'd say that gives any book at least a 3-star rating for me personally.
Same to everything I said at the top of the episode, 3.75 stars. My biggest hangup was still the book is lacking in emotional investment and the characters and their journey. So yeah. I think that can change in the next book, but for now, it is what it is.
So for the likes and dislikes section, I switched it up a little bit. Instead of the same likes that I already talked about in the spoiler-free section, I decided to do favorite scenes. So, as you guys know by now, Kane was a favorite character, so I liked how flirty and supportive he was with Ren. I really liked the initial scene when they first get to their rooms and realize there's not enough beds, and Ren slips into bed with Kane, and he has zero problem with that, of course. But I love that after Ren threatens him to keep his hands to himself, he says, "Stop it, Darlington. Threats of violence only get me hotter." My next favorite scene was when Ren sneaks into Cross's quarters to prove that she's a good operative and be given another chance to earn her way back up in training rankings. I thought it was funny that Cross wasn't even that surprised she showed up there and instead was just like, "You want to join?" I also really like the desert sniper training scene because Ren finally starts to try in those scenes, so they felt more important and engaging to me. And B, we get the camp out in the desert where Ren and Cross have their side-by-side shower scene, which of course was flirty and fun to read about. Also, I feel like that was just kind of wild that everyone could see them. I know the showers are kind of far off, but the fact that everybody just could see them like getting side by side,
having eye sex in the shower. Yeah.
And secondhand embarrassment thinking about that. So I don't have the balls for that. Could never be me.
Could never be me. Mm-mm.
And my last favorite scene was the whole Jubilee scenario. I just felt like that was a really exciting way to start closing out the book and transition us into the next book and everything, since it forced Ren to leave the command and go find the uprising and all that stuff. So yeah, very interesting.
This will not come as a surprise in the slightest, but Daddy, I love him, Kane, Grayson. Matter of fact, I'll call him whatever he wants as long as he gets to be my book boyfriend. Okay.
As long as he calls you cowgirl.
Oh my God. Oh, yes. It's not even my thing, but it is now. No, but like literally, I loved every scene with him. I also really enjoyed the middle of the book when she's in the training program. I really liked reading all the ops they went on. I liked watching Ren excel at most of the courses. I also specifically loved the plot twist with Fatima being modified, Liddy betraying Ren, and of course my all-time favorite was that Kane was still alive. And not only that, but he was the hotshot pilot. I love that. Last, I also really liked all the descriptions of how being modified worked and all of the abilities they had. I thought they were very unique and interesting. I thought the author did a great job with the world building on that. So I really liked it.
All right, moving on to some dislikes. In addition to all of my dislikes regarding the narrative style and a general lack of connection to the characters and their experiences as a whole, I also just felt like Ren fell a little bit flat as an FMC for me. I think it would have made for a much better story for her to realize she was in a unique position to work for the uprising in her own way, which is kind of what she wanted anyway. I also felt like the romance was just a little bit flat. I felt like because Cross was Wolf, there was this instant attraction that just pulled them together. And outside of that, there wasn't much emotional development. We do learn more about his mother, and that helped you kind of get to know him a little bit better. But overall, I just kind of felt like the character development for everyone was kind of lacking in this book.
I can definitely see that. Go ahead and just copy paste all of my comments about the lack of emotional investment in the characters for my dislikes. The romance between Cross and Ren fell a little flat for me. It felt a little formulaic, and because I like Kane and their chemistry so much better, it's really hard for me to root for Cross, and I feel like that's a misfire on the author's part. You got to read that and think, and you're right, they do have more chemistry. I need to tone it down,
Yeah.
Or fire it up between Cross and Ren. I absolutely fucking detested when Ren removed her burn scar and tells Cross that she can incite. It was just so idiotic and counterintuitive to everything she's been taught. It made Jim's sacrifice feel wasted. I was like, wow, what was the point? You threw it all away for Cross.
And her whole complaint, her whole big scene in front of Ellis the first time when they tried to heal her.
Yes.
Like, no, this is so
literally had a panic attack. Yes, yes. And then even Cross is like, that wasn't the best idea. And she was like, oh, you fucking asshole. Oh my God. You hated reading that scene. But my biggest complaint, well, I shouldn't say it's my biggest, but I'm going to make it into my biggest one. Every time Ren was with Cross, she would think about what was going on in the scene and then be like, I hate my traitorous mind for focusing on how smoking hot Cross is. He's all I can think about. I'm despicable, but those pecs, am I right? It was every fucking time they were in the same room together. Mm-hmm. And I get it. He's hot and you feel this attraction to him, but it was too much. It made it feel like the relationship was only about physical attraction. And don't get me wrong, I like the spice. I thought the spice writing was pretty good, but it was just like, can you have any other thoughts about him other than his fucking abs?
Right.
It cheapened it for me.
All right. So now we just have our favorite moments and or quotes to share to close out the episode. So my first favorite quote was from Kane. It's when he said, "Stop it, Darlington. Threats of violence only get me hotter."
I liked when Cross and Ren have their little showdown and she has to try to get past him to get to the door. And Ford walks into them and basically finds them wrestling. And he's like, It's a good scene. Funny.
My next favorite part was when Ren shoots Xavier's canteen in the desert. And all Cross says to her is, nobody likes to show off Dove. Because she was like trying so hard to impress them, and then she gets pissed that they scored her poorly. So
I like when they're all forced to jog every morning and Ren thinks, who invented jogging? Is this not something we could have left behind in the old era?
True that. I too do not enjoy running. My next favorite part was when after Ren invades Cross's quarters and catches him in the middle of fun time with another woman, he just asks, "Are you here to join or watch?"
This is a pretty smooth response, I will say. I really liked reading about Ren trying to beat the fallen soldier drill. I am ultra competitive, and I feel like I would have also been the same way. Like, no one else can beat it, but I can. I will find a way. And I also like that Ren didn't compromise who she was just to pass the drill. So a little bit of funny and emotional there.
My next favorite moment was when Cross and Ren go on the date to the Daggerstone cave. And more specifically, I just like the description of the Daggerstone because I could really vividly imagine it. And it said, "More Daggerstone hangs from the ceiling like crystal chandeliers, their icy tendrils sparkling in the light. Across the cavern is a pool of water that glimmers like liquid silver, like modified veins, reflecting the dazzling array of colors that dance across the walls."
I love when Ren and Kane realize they don't work well together because they're too similar. And Ren asks Kane what he put down as his greatest weaknesses. And Kane says, reckless, impatient. And then Ren asks him what his third one was. And Kane goes, too good looking.
Classic. My next favorite one was actually from Cross. And it's when he told Ren, "You're in my soul, Ren. I take a breath and feel you in my chest. You're inside of me. You have been since I was a kid, and the thought of losing you."
Aw, that is kind of romantic. Maybe I do like Cross. Oh, I'm such a sap. As a sub point to more about Kane and the fallen soldier drill, I like when it's Kane's turn. It's described, he smacks a kiss on my cheek and says, "It's been nice knowing you, cowgirl." And then the asswit dashes off. He just fucking leaves her behind.
Yeah, I'm not sticking around to lose. My next favorite one was in relation to Liddy, and it's when Ren thinks, "For someone who works in intelligence, Liddy has a big mouth."
That's true, actually. Yeah, I would not do well in intelligence. I have a big ass mouth, for real. So
Liddy loves to gossip.
She sure do. This is a bit morbid, but I like when Tana killed Anson and Ren helped cover it up. I know killing is wrong, but he was a predator and he got what he deserved. And I ain't sad to see him gone. Yeah.
Same. I'm glad that he didn't make it into book 2.
I agree. I'm glad she wrapped that up.
My last favorite moment was just the reveal that Kane is Grayson Blank. He was already hot, but with that reveal,
yes. How did he get Kane, which is a hot name, and Grayson Blake? Like, both of the names are super hot, you know?
Yeah, why did Cross get Cross?
Yeah, Cross isn't doing
Where
for
did
me.
that even come from?
My last favorite one is, I guess, similar to yours, is when Cross takes Ren to the Daggerstone cave. That felt more like Wolf, and I thought it was really sweet. It was actually nice to see them outside of the command base and see them like on a date. And so I think if we can get more moments like that, then I think Cross and Ren's relationship will grow on me.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right. So that officially concludes our episode. So thank you guys for joining us for another episode of the Booked on Fantasy podcast. As always, we're so glad you found us. So please leave us a review and follow us on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube to keep up with us on a daily basis. Well, holy hell fuck. Well, that's all we've got for you guys today.
And we'll catch you all next week, cowgirl.
Bye.
Bye. And stay tuned for some bloopers.
I like the accent.
Thank you. And we'll catch y'all next week, cowgirl.
Giddy up. And as we stated, okay. And before we get into, I don't know why I'm having such a hard time. Like,
oh, it's going to be a good episode. It's going to be long as hell, but it's going to be good. Making book besties that we actually get to talk to about books that we've, it's making book. Oh my gosh, I can't say it now. Oh my God, why can't I say it right? Okay. I actually liked this twist in the plot because it opened so many doors. Oh my God, the order of the words that I have written, I cannot read them in that order.
You've been frazzle-dazzled.
I've been frazzled. You frazzled my dazzle, Lori.
Lori is a menace to society.
Lori, then let us be menaces.